Chapter 157. What is this? There were more and more cultivators on the grass. At this time, they were all attracted by the movement in the sky and looked up. The seven-colored rainbow bridge was faintly discernible. Xing opened her eyes wide and saw it clearly. Look, that's not Meng Qi. That's just her shadow. There's more over there. Xing suddenly pointed to the sky and shouted. Everyone looked up and saw a second figure slowly appearing beside Meng Qi's shadow. The black-robed youth stood tall. Even though he was high up in the sky, he was still a little far from them. Everyone could also see his handsome features. That youth looked cold and sharp, like a sword that was about to be unsheathed. All the cultivators on the grass turned their heads and looked at the black-robed youth's shadow. It was the pavilion master of Falling Star Pavilion, Pei Mufeng. However, before they could say anything, a third figure appeared in the sky. In the blue sky, the man in the same black robe looked a little hazy. His back was straight. In terms of appearance, he would not lose to Pei Mufeng. Junior brother Qin. Someone murmured. Qin Xiaoma took a deep breath and turned his head to look at that person. Xing's eyes widened. She looked at the sky, then at Pei Mufeng, then at Qin Xiaoma. Finally, she murmured, "What's going on?" Yes, what's going on?" Chu Tianfeng was also stunned. "Why are you two also, Zaya shooting?" Before he finished speaking, a fourth figure appeared in the sky. Yin Xian. There were even more people who knew this young master of Jinghua Heaven. Almost everywhere on the grass, there were voices calling out Yin Xian's name. Of course, there were also many people who knew that he had fallen from the top of the younger generation of the 3,000 worlds to the current trash appearance. You? Xing looked up at this scene, her eyes filled with surprise. At this moment, the fifth figure finally appeared in the sky. It was Xue Chengxian. "Brother," Xue Zichen exclaimed. "I have you." Xue Chengshuan's reputation was no less than Pei Mufeng's. He was almost set to be the future leader of the Wind Alliance. At the same time, he was the most outstanding young medical cultivator in the 3,000 worlds. He had many friends. Adding on his identity as a medical Xiao, he had always been liked by Xiaojia. Xing and Chu Tianfeng looked at each other and hurriedly looked at Qin Xiaoma. Since he was also here, he must know something. Qin Xiaoma looked serious and said nothing. What the hell is going on? Chu Tianfeng was anxious. This guy's silence was really annoying sometimes. Did he not know that this was the 10 Extremes Mountain? Since Meng Qi was involved, this matter had to be handled with extreme caution. Soon, the sixth figure appeared. This time, it was finally someone Xing and the others did not recognize. However, many Xiaojia here clearly knew this person. They immediately shouted, "It's Xiao Ran from the Broken Space sect." They did not recognize this person. However, Xing knew about the Broken Space sect. After all, this sect had been looking for Meng Qi for a long time. The grass was instantly filled with whispers. Not to mention Xiao Ran, just the 3 words Broken Space sect were enough to make people revere, especially the disciples who could come here. They all came from the 10 great sects of the 3,000 worlds and 4 worlds. They were all very well informed. This Xiao Ran was the direct disciple of the new sect leader, Ling Ji, who had just seized the position of sect leader by force. It was said that he was the most outstanding disciple he was proud of. At this moment, no one hesitated. At this moment, 6 figures appeared in the sky. Other than Meng Qi, they were all genius disciples from large sections. That Meng Qi, although he did not belong to any sect, he was recognized by the ancient great Dr. Lin Yan. Just this identity alone was far superior to those disciples of normal medical cultivation sections. Li Che stood not far from Xing. He was also quietly looking at Meng Qi's elegant face. "Shi Xiao, do you know what's going on?" His sect's disciple was asking him in a low voice. "I'm not sure either." Li Che shook his head lightly. Xue Chengxian and Meng Qi were both there. They were also medical cultivators. Li Che clenched his fists slightly. Just now, they had fought side by side and detoxified the Xiaojia here. He met his Shitty's puzzled gaze and smiled embarrassedly. "I really don't know what's going on." "Brother," Xue Zichen also asked anxiously. What's going on? Shui Chengxian did not immediately answer his sister. Instead, he looked at Pei Mufeng and Qin Xiaoma. They could be considered to have fought side by side in the Starfall Sea. He indeed had a wide circle of friends. After all, they had experienced life and death together. He also wanted to know if these two people were there for the same reason as him. Brother, Shui Zichen frowned. What's going on? Say something. She anxiously stomped her feet. Why was that Meng Qi also there? She pouted slightly, a little unhappy. Ever since that time in the apricot forest, Meng Qi showed his extraordinary talent in front of so many medical cultivation sects and received the recognition of Senior Lin Yin. Whether it was the elders in her family or friends, they all seemed to like to compare her with Meng Qi. In the past, she was the favored daughter of God. She was the most favored daughter of the Wind Alliance's Shui family. She was also the most talented medical cultivator among the girls of her generation in the Wind Alliance. Even her two sisters could not compare to her. Shui Zichen was young and beautiful. She came from a noble family and was extremely talented. She was the Dao companion candidate that the young disciples of the Wind Alliance, and even the entire West Kingdom or the 3,000 worlds were very happy to choose. But ever since Meng Qi appeared, people were very happy to compare the two of them when they talked about her. Although she was still the apple of the Shui family's master's eye and was very likely to be the sister of the future Wind Alliance master, everyone still respected her, spoiled her, and gave in to her. But there were still some things that seemed to have become different. Shui Zichen could not tell what was different. When the elders looked at her, their gazes were still loving. Where her peers and friends were with her, they would still give in to her and envy her. But there would always be one or two inadvertent moments when everyone would mention Meng Qi when they saw her. Perhaps it was because the two of them were about the same age, or perhaps it was because before Meng Qi appeared, she was the most anticipated genius among the younger generation of female medical cultivators. They would joke and say regretfully, "If it was you who passed the apricot forest boundary test that day, your father would be very happy." There would also be those young male cultivators who used to chase after her, curry favor with her, and adore her. They would occasionally mention Meng Qi in a teasing tone, saying that the elders in their families had also hinted that if they could become friends with Meng Qi, they must seize the opportunity. It had to be known that the elders of these young male cultivators used to like and value her the most in their marriage. Of course, there would also be close friends who had a crush on her brother, who would ask her if her family really wanted her brother, Shui Chengxian, to marry Meng Qi. Shui Zichen could not help but stomp her feet when she thought of this. She had her pride, and she could not help but secretly compare herself with Meng Qi. She had heard her father talk about this trip to the 10 Extremes mountain long ago and had made a lot of preparations for this. She believed that she would definitely perform better than most people, and perhaps even better than her brother. She would once again become the proud daughter of heaven that made her family and her father proud. Of course, she would also leave Meng Qi far behind. After all, she was the eldest daughter of the number 1 medical cultivator sect in the 3,000 worlds. What she had learned and seen since she was young was not something that Meng Qi could compare to. She had only won against her once because of a coincidence and her luck. Shui Zichen believed that as long as the two of them were given an absolutely fair competition, she would definitely not lose to Meng Qi. Therefore, she worked very hard in the first 3 stages. She also believed that the time she spent was definitely shorter than Meng Qi. Even when in the second stage, her brother helped Meng Qi because of the elders in the family and gave her the Shui family's spiritual medicine scripture, she still believed that she would not lose. Meng Qi came from a small sect that she had never heard of. When it came to a real fair competition like this, it was impossible for her to lose. But now, Shui Zichen looked at her silent brother and then looked at the 6 figures in the sky. Other than Meng Qi, the rest of them could be considered as geniuses of various sects and were famous. But this Meng Qi, why was it Meng Qi again? Shui Zichen could not help but stomp her feet again. How could this Meng Qi be so lucky? She could always get involved. What did she do this time? She clearly came out earlier than her, and even earlier than Li Che. Shui Zichen looked around. Among all the medical cultivators here, she was clearly the first one to come out, except for her brother. Brother! Xue Zichen stomped her feet again and reached out to grab her brother's arm. Why aren't you saying anything? What happened? Xue Chengxian shook his head and said, I'm not sure yet, but maybe. He hesitated for a moment, then strode towards Pei Mufeng. Xue Zichen looked left and right, then quickly followed. Secmaster Pei. Xue Chengxian cupped his hands towards Pei Mufeng. Fellow Taoist Xue. Pei Mufeng returned the greeting. I have a question to ask Secmaster Pei. I wonder if, before he could finish, he heard Pei Mufeng say, they didn't skip. They completed all the missions. As expected, Xue Chengxian nodded. Brother. Xue Zichen looked at Pei Mufeng, then at her brother. She was a little confused. You're saying, a young man behind Xue Zichen snorted coldly. What they're saying is that they didn't skip a single mission in the third stage that we just went through. They completed all the missions there. What? Xue Zichen was stunned and hurriedly turned around. Behind her, the black-robed young man, Chu Tianfeng, and Qin Xiaomo walked over side by side. The one who just spoke was Chu Tianfeng. Beside them was the unhappy Xikong Xing. It seems that Brother Qin is the same. Xue Chengxian smiled and looked at the black-robed young man. Brother, you the same? Xue Zichen looked at her brother in disbelief. But you. She opened her mouth, but suddenly couldn't say anything. Her black pearl-like bright and beautiful eyes suddenly widened. Xue Zichen had always felt that her talent wasn't inferior to her brother's. She even secretly compared the time she took to cultivate to reach the third realm of medicine. She actually took less time than her brother. She was also ambitious. She also thought that if she was the eldest daughter in the family, her father would place high hopes on her, and the elders would secretly choose her as the future head of the family. But now, Xue Zichen felt that she was already very fast in the third stage. Just like Li Che, she only chose the easiest of the three most difficult missions. As for the rooms in front of her, she quickly realized that she only needed to treat one of them to skip the room on the opposite side of the same row. She also secretly observed the time that her brother came out. She believed that he must have done the same as her, so he was only faster than her by an hour. So, Xue Zichen opened her mouth. In fact, no one asked her what happened, but her face quietly became hot. It turned out that her brother didn't skip a single room and didn't skip any of the last three most difficult missions. Even so, he was still faster than her by an hour. It seemed that she still had a long way to go. Her brother was really very powerful. And this Meng Qi, Xue Zichen thought and looked up at the figure in the sky. This Meng Qi was also very powerful. She was just a little slower than her. If she also didn't skip any of the missions, she silently calculated in her heart. If it were her, she definitely wouldn't be able to come out now if she didn't skip any of the missions. Now, she might not be able to reach the last three rooms. Xue Zichen pursed her lips, and the hands hanging by her side quietly clenched a little. She would work hard. Even if she lost her brother by a little, she would never lose to this Meng Qi, who was inferior to her in terms of background, sect. She would become stronger and more powerful. There hadn't been any movement in the sky for a while. The six figures were reflected in the sky, just like that. The Xiozha on the grass discussed, and more or less came to a conclusion. Holy shit. Ever since we all got poisoned by the drunken dragon grass in the last mission, and that person instigated us to kill each other, I felt that this place was very strange and gave off a feeling that something wasn't right. As expected, we've been tricked again. So at the beginning, what was the shortest time, and then differentiating where we were when we started climbing the 10 Extremes mountain? Was that also a lie? Is there anyone who can explain whether it's a lie or not? If it wasn't for that hint, I wouldn't have been so smug when I found out that I could skip half of the missions and ran so fast. That's right, that's right. Can anyone come out and explain what's going on? I say, don't rush. According to the rules of this broken place, it might not be a good thing to pick them out. Seconded, it might be a case of shooting the bird that sticks out. That's right. Maybe the big shots of the 10 Extremes mountain did it on purpose. Look at the 6 people, everyone saw it clearly. They also know who the other party is. Then the 10 Extremes Mountain will send another one. These 6 people will have a certain advantage in the next climb. TSK, TSK, TSK. I feel that it's really possible. If they want to give a reward, just give it directly. With this, everyone will know who is in the lead in the 3 missions. At that time, there might be people targeting them. The tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. That's right. That's why it might not be a good thing. The Shioja discussed one after another. At the beginning, after everyone knew the crux of the matter, they were still a little annoyed and felt that they were tricked again. But these 6 figures were hanging in the sky, and everyone saw it clearly. They also didn't see Pei Mufeng, Shui, Chang Xian, and the others who came out already get any benefits. Slowly, the thoughts of the Shioja started to change. Some Shioja even faintly rejoiced in others' misfortune. After all, a place like the 10 Extremes Mountain, to put it nicely, after leaving, no one would know what happened inside. It was almost like there were no rules to restrict everyone. Don't look at how Shui Changxian and Meng Qi had just saved everyone. When Meng Qi and Lu Qing Ran had a dispute, they would stand out to help her and firmly stand on her side. But once it involved a real struggle for benefits, to these people, the sex benefits and their own cultivation were still the most important. Some people already started to ponder in their hearts. Anyway, I won't take the initiative to attack those 2. But the other few, if there's a chance, I can deal with them, right? If there's really someone who doesn't care about anything and completely shed all pretense of cordiality to deal with them, it shouldn't be a problem if we don't step on them and don't help them, right? As time passed, the atmosphere on the grassland also became more and more solemn and strange. Many Shioja stopped talking and gathered in 2s and 3s with a few fellow disciples or good friends. From time to time, they would look at Pei Mufeng and the others. Instantly, this place became a bit strange again. Why hasn't Meng Qi come out yet? Xikong Xing and the others naturally also felt the change here. She stomped her feet a bit anxiously and looked around. Where did she go? The 4th stage hasn't opened yet. I keep feeling. She lightly bit her lower lip. Even she felt the change in the atmosphere. Chu Tianfeng's face was even darker. As the young palace master of Burning Sky Palace, he had seen more of this kind of thing. The Shioja here could also draw their swords against fellow disciples, not to mention a few outsiders who had a competitive relationship with them. Hey! Chu Tianfeng leaned over and asked Qin Xiuma, "What do you think?" "I don't think much." Qin Xiuma's expression was slightly cold, and his gaze was heavy as he looked at the Shioja who would secretly glance at him from time to time. "I will do my best." He didn't say the last few words out loud. Chu Tianfeng snorted lightly, his heart full of annoyance. Why had he been in such a hurry to come out? If something really happened later, he wouldn't be able to do anything, right? He paced back and forth in irritation. A cold light suddenly flashed through his eyes. He reached out with his left hand, and his long fingers spread. A red lotus appeared in the air above his palm. If something really happens later, I will not be merciful. When he finished speaking, he was gritting his teeth, but his voice was very cold. Xikong Xing had interacted with them for a long time, but she had never seen this young palace master of Burning Sky Palace like this. She looked at Chu Tianfeng like this and unconsciously shuddered. "What do you mean?" "All right." Chu Tianfeng did not answer her. The one who spoke was Qin Xiuma. The corner of his lips rose slightly. "Just what I wanted." "You?" Xikong Xing was puzzled. "What do you mean?" "You don't need to know." Chu Tianfeng made up his mind and was not as irritable as before. "This is what we need to do." "What do you mean, Chu Tianfeng?" Xikong Xing was not happy. "We can be considered friends of life and death. Don't think about leaving me aside, no matter what you 2 do. Then you will know later." Chu Tianfeng glanced at her and said, "You 2 are so annoying. Can't you not keep me in suspense and say it out loud?" Xikong Xing was dissatisfied. The 3 of them had been standing some distance away from the crowd. They had also deliberately lowered their voices. Other than the 3 of them, no one else heard. Xikong Xing still did not know what had happened, but she could see that the situation was more serious than she had imagined. She also became serious and warily scanned the surroundings, Meng Qi will be fine, right? Why hasn't she come out yet? At this time, almost all the Xiuzha who had entered the 10 Extremes Mountain were here. Probably only Meng Qi had not left the third test. As if to explain Si Kongxing's words, all the Xiuzha on the grass heard a light ding sound, and then a cold female voice sounded. 10 Extremes Mountain Great Battlefield. Prepare for battle. Open. That voice was not loud and very pleasant to the ears. However, there was no emotion, and it sounded as cold as ice. Following the voice, the grass that had been silent for a while suddenly became noisy. 10 Extremes Mountain Great Battlefield. What was that? The Xiuzha looked at each other. You look at me, I look at you. They could only see confusion in each other's eyes. Everyone knew that once they left the 10 Extremes Mountain, they would not remember everything that had happened here. However, after 10,000 years of inheritance, everyone naturally felt that since it was called the 10 Extremes Mountain, it was definitely used for climbing. Great Battlefield, what was this? However, this place was not the respective sect of the Xiuzha, and no one came out to explain to them what was going on. They heard that cold female voice continue to say, "The Great Battlefield will officially begin after 15 minutes. The battlefield will be divided into 2 camps. The Xiuzha who passed the third test will be the Heaven Camp. The Xiuzha who did not pass the third test will be the Earth Camp." Did not pass the third test. The Xiuzha seemed to have understood something, and they all raised their heads to look at the sky. Then wasn't it obvious who was the Heaven Camp, who was the Earth Camp? These people were still hanging in the sky. So this was 6 against all of them. Some Xiuzha instantly rejoiced. It seemed that not passing the third test was not a bad thing. Who knew that this 10 Extremes Mountain would play such a trick? Even if the other 6 were all geniuses, they had an absolute advantage in terms of numbers right now. I will announce the rules. That cold female voice continued to say, "First, the Heaven Camp and Earth Camp Xiuzha can use any method to attack the other party, including but not limited to divine weapons, talismans, poisons, poisonous insects, and beasts. After being injured, they can use medicinal pills, natural treasures, and talismans to heal themselves. The effect is the same as outside of the 10 Extremes Mountain. The Heaven Camp Xiuzha have 3 chances to revive. The Earth Camp Xiuzha will directly fail if they fail, and will have the chance to continue participating in the 10 Extremes Mountains test." The Xiuzha were in an uproar again. In other words, as long as they lost, they would be directly sent away. However, thinking about it, the other party had 6 people. Even if each person had 3 lives, it would still be difficult. Added together, it would not even be 20. On their side, there were 100 people. Even the sect members of those 6 people might not help the other party. After all, the 10 Extremes Mountain was a great help to the Xiuzha. If they could fight to stay, no one would be willing to give it up. Most of the Xiuzha on the grass swept away their previous disappointment, and all of them became spirited. Even if they had 3 chances, looking at the current situation, it was clear that their side had the advantage. The 10 great sects of the 4 realms, each sect had 3 disciples that could enter the 10 Extremes Mountain. Adding on the extra spots given by Jingwest Sky, there were a total of 130 Xiuzha that entered the 10 Extremes Mountain this time. Among them, other than Meng Qi and Yin Xian, the weakest was a complete Yuanying Xiuzha. Among them, there were mainly fused soul Xiuzha, and there were even some strong Xiuzha that had just stepped into the profound void realm. These were the most promising and outstanding disciples of the younger generation in the 10 great sections. Any 10 of them gathered together was a group of Xiuzha that could not be underestimated. What's more, other than the 6 people on their side, there were a total of 114 Xiuzha. There were spell Xiuzha, sword Xiuzha, and medical Xiuzha. No matter if it was attacking or defending, there would not be a problem. Even if the sect members of those 6 people all chose to help them, they still had an absolute advantage. The Xiuzha instantly became excited. This was the 10 Extremes Mountain. To non-disciples of Jingwest Sky, it was an opportunity that could only be entered once every 100 years. This time, the 10 Extremes Mountain opened once every 10,000 years. If they could win against the other party, the benefits that they could obtain in the 10 Extremes Mountain was absolutely unimaginable. What's more, some Shioja even had a trace of secret pleasure in their hearts. Right now, the 6 people that were assigned to the Heaven Barracks, other than Meng Qi, were the true geniuses of the 3 realms' younger generation. They were the same generation that crushed them as they grew after they stepped onto the path of cultivation. Even though not everyone would be jealous, since there was competition in the 10 Extremes Mountain, winning against the other party in such a relatively fair competition would also fill many people with anticipation. Just as that icy voice finished announcing the first rule, the gazes of the Shioja became burning with anticipation. But no one spoke first. They stood quietly on the spot, listening to that icy female voice continue. Second, the Heaven Barracks will attack, the Earth Barracks will defend. If you cannot defeat the other party within 44 hours, exchange. The Shioja on the grass didn't do anything. Si Kongxing almost jumped up. The Heaven Barracks will attack. She couldn't believe her ears. She turned to look at Qin Xiaoma. You guys will attack? The 6 of you will attack, and we will defend with 100 people. She muttered and repeated this inconceivable rule. But if it's like this, isn't it too easy to defend? Even she knew that the Shioja that could appear here were the elites of the elites. Don't talk about 6 people attacking 100 people. Even if 60 people attacked, they might not be able to defeat them. What kind of joke was this? And if they couldn't defeat them within 44 hours, the offense and defense would change. That was the other way around. 100 people attacking 6 people? Wasn't this easy? Si Kongxing blinked her eyes. Qin Xiaoma's expression was also abnormally serious. Shitty. His Xixiang Wei Yuanzhong walked to his side and grimaced. I didn't think that the matter would develop to this step. What plans do you have? There was only him and Qin Shitty left on cloud treading peak. Wei Yuanzhong also knew that in terms of talent, he couldn't compare to Qin Shitty no matter what. If he had to choose one of the 2 to stay for the sect, he would rather choose Qin Xiaoma to stay. Qin Xiaoma glanced at him, his tone faint. Let's talk about it when it starts. That's true. Wei Yuanzhong grimaced. Right now, he really felt that this 10 Extreme Mountain definitely wasn't the holy cultivation ground that the outside world said it was. He didn't know what kind of people were here. They could only hear sounds, but couldn't see people. However, each one of them was unspeakably strange. From the start, they had been tricked into taking the time to pass because they had to rely on this to determine their position in 10 Extreme Mountain. Then the person that had been sowing discord before, now using this method to divide them into 2 groups and kill each other. This really didn't seem like a holy cultivation ground at all. It was more like someone had purposefully gathered them together and enjoyed watching them kill each other. Wei Yuanzhong looked at his Shitty worriedly. Sigh, there was no other way now. They could only take 1 step at a time. Third, this time, that female voice didn't make them wait too long and quickly announced the next rule. The 6 Shioja from the Heaven Barracks who passed the 3rd challenge, for every 12 hours they persist, they will receive a 10 Extreme reward. When the battle starts, they will randomly receive 3 reinforcements. Regardless of the cultivation of the reinforcements are limited to perfect spirit severing. 3 reinforcements, even if they were all perfect spirit severing, it shouldn't be a big deal. However, everyone had already confirmed that the 6 people in the sky were the Shioja from the Heaven Barracks this time, and they were from the Earth Barracks side. Thinking about it this way, even if those 6 people had 3 more perfect spirit severing helpers, it actually wasn't a big deal. As for the 10 Extreme reward that was given every 12 hours, it probably wouldn't be too exaggerated. It definitely wouldn't be a reward that could help them completely destroy their own side. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a need to have a face-off battle like this. Fourth, after a Heaven Barracks Shioja dies 3 times, they can choose to join the Earth Barracks team, but they only have 3 chances. Once this rule was announced, there was finally some reaction from the grass. Those Shioja that clearly belonged to the Earth Barracks instantly went into an uproar. Poison. This rule was really too poisonous. The person that could think of this rule was so scheming that it was terrifying. To explain this rule, it basically meant that the first 3 people from the Heaven Barracks that used up all 3 of their lives could join the Earth Barracks. That way, Even if the Heaven Barracks lost in the end, they could still continue to stay in 10 Extreme Mountain. They could even enter the Earth Barracks and obtain the final victory and receive the benefits of this battle. The present situation was that the Earth Barracks had an absolute advantage in numbers. The 6 people from the Heaven Barracks should be clear that their chances of winning were very small. This way, before the battle even started, the Heaven Barracks might start to have internal strife, because what they were pursuing was not victory, but a quick death. However, they quickly realized that there would definitely be corresponding rules and restrictions. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a need to fight. The other side didn't care who was more important and could declare the battle over if 3 of them died. Fifth, as expected, that icy female voice quickly spoke and announced the next rule. Earth Barracks Shioja that were saved by the Heaven Barracks Medical Shio can join the Heaven Barracks. There is no limit to the number of people. Heaven Barracks Shioja that were saved by the Earth Barracks Medical Shio will die once. HM? This is, many Shioja made puzzled sounds. This was a new rule. Didn't there need to be restrictions on the previous rule? But this way, it was relatively fair. Even though the other side only had 6 people, they had 2 medical Shio. One of them was the most outstanding youth of the younger generation of the Wind Alliance, the strongest medical Shio sect in the 3,000 worlds. The other was the ancient great Dr. Elder Lin Yuan, who had become famous in the 3,000 worlds in the last year, and was personally acknowledged as a friend. Some people even suspected that this rule was set up because of these 2 people. This way, the other side could pull the Shioja on their side into the Heaven Barracks through saving people. No wonder they were allowed to attack first, even though they only had 6 people. Thinking about it, if they defended first with the current division of the camp strength, they might lose in the blink of an eye. But if they attacked first for 24 hours, they might be able to accumulate a certain amount of strength. The grassland became silent again. Overall, the 5 rules were more useful for the Earth Barracks, which had more people. But after all, the other side had Pei Mufeng, Qin Xiaoma, and Shui Chengxian, as well as Su Zian from the Broken Space sect. Moreover, they had 3 external aids and the 10 absolutes reward every 12 hours. Adding on the 5th rule, it was hard to say what would happen in the end. As for the Earth Barracks, they had the absolute advantage of numbers and could use the 4th rule to pull the 3 people into their camp first. If they could really do that, then there was basically no need to fight this time. The 6th rule, which is also the most important one. The cold female voice spoke again. This time, she did not speak quickly. Slowly, she said one word at a time. On the path of cultivation, Daozhong, please do not obstruct. 10 Extremes Mountain does not keep the weak and does not keep people with weak hearts. Everyone, take care of yourselves. What did this mean? Everyone looked at each other in dismay and became somewhat nervous. Not keeping the weak was easy to understand. The meaning was clearly that the Shioja who lost in this great battle did not have the right to stay. Then what did not keep people with weak hearts mean? Everyone looked at each other and saw the confusion in each other's eyes. What does this mean? Xikong Xing directly asked. Not only did she have Chu Tianfeng, Qin Xiaoma, Wei Yuanzhong, and Yin Xian by her side. I'm guessing that this person means that we cannot purposely lose to the other camp, Wei Yuanzhong said thoughtfully. Although this elder did not directly say it, but this way, those who have other thoughts and are scheming will probably not dare to act rashly. Is that so? Xikong Xing nodded as if she understood, and then almost jumped up. Then if I want to get injured from the start, purposely get saved by Meng Qi, and then join their side, is that not allowed? Wei Yuanzhong smiled bitterly. I'm afraid so. He could not help but look at the red-clothed girl again. Xikong Xing was naturally very beautiful, and she was also generous and warm. She could say such things without restraint. She could say them as she pleased. Such a person was probably not a Shioja from the 3,000 worlds, but more like something the Yao Shio would say. But Xikong Xing's brows were tightly knitted. Meng Qi's side only has 6 people. Even if they have external help, it's only 9 people. There are more than 100 people here. How can they win? She turned back to look at Chu Tianfeng. The black-clothed youth was also frowning, clearly worried about the same thing as her. It seemed that he had the same idea as her, but they did not think that there would be this last rule. If they were really directly sent out of 10 Extremes Mountain from the start, then they might as well stay and see if they could help Meng Qi in other areas. Let's wait and see. Chu Tianfeng took a deep breath and said. From a moment he remembered everything that happened in the past. He was no longer the arrogant and reckless youth who could not listen to other people's words in his previous life. He could sacrifice himself, but he could not just leave without doing anything for Meng Qi. Okay. Si Gongxing hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I think so too. Let's see what kind of situation it is first, then we'll decide. You, be careful. Chu Tianfeng glanced at Yin Xian, then looked at Qin Xiuma's eyes. Remember what you said. Qin Xiuma glanced at him indifferently, then walked forward. Meng Qi had not appeared yet. Now he, Yin Xian, Pei Mufeng, Qiao Ran, and Xue Chengxian were temporary partners. Pei Mufeng was all right. Qin Xiuma had met him in Starfall Sea, and he had a good impression of this young pavilion master of Starfall Pavilion. As for the others, he reserved his attitude. Especially now that it involved the Battle of 10 Extremes Mountain, anything could happen. Qin Xiuma could decisively kill the person who betrayed him with one sword, so he would definitely not be soft-hearted to others. Yin Xian quickly followed. Qin Xiuma and the others gathered together. The surrounding cultivators all subconsciously took a step back, keeping a distance from them. Although the battle had not started yet, the two camps were already starting to become distinct. More than 100 people stood on one side. In comparison, the 5 people on their side seemed so small. 10 Extremes Mountain Battlefield, open. That female voice sounded again. As her voice fell, more than 100 light pillars descended from the sky, enveloping all of them. In an instant, the grassland became empty. The more than 100 practitioners who were here just now had all disappeared. Qin Xiuma only felt a flash in front of his eyes, and he quickly heard a familiar voice by his ear. You're here. He immediately responded. Meng Qi. Xue Chengxian first looked around. This should be in a paradise now. This paradise was not big, other than the fact that the spiritual energy was especially dense, and even cultivators like them could quickly replenish their spiritual energy through breathing. There was nothing else special about it. Meng Qi, who was dressed in a green robe, stood in the innermost part of the paradise. In front of her was a smooth stone wall that was about the height of 2 people. The side of the stone wall that was facing everyone was so shiny that it could reflect their figures clearly. Meng Qi's gaze swept across the 5 people in front of her. She also never thought that the final result of the 3rd test would be like this. You heard what that person said just now? Qin Xiuma asked. Why didn't you go out? And I heard it. Meng Qi nodded. There's not much time. I'll make it short. They only had 24 hours, and she could clearly hear the cold female voice. Although she didn't know how the 6 of them could win in such a situation, for the time being, she still didn't know. However, after thinking about it, Meng Qi also knew that the first 24 hours must be very important to them. After I finished the last task, I was directly sent here. She pointed to the shiny stone and said, this is a huge piece of stardust. It was refined with daybreak flower juice for 1,000 years. Daybreak flower? Stardust? Xue Chengxian could not help but step forward. He looked at the huge stone in disbelief. No wonder the spiritual energy here is so dense. It seems that it's all because of this piece of stardust. What's a daybreak flower? Qiao Ran asked. He had not spoken much until now. It was only now that he spoke for the first time. As Qiao Ran asked, he could not help but look at Meng Qi. Master had warned him repeatedly that if this Meng Qi lost a single strand of hair in the 10 Extremes Mountain, he would send him to the sect's most dangerous and brutal Sword Ray Valley to train for 10 years. The Sword Ray Valley of the Broken Void sect was a famous, dangerous place in the entire 3,000 worlds. It was said that there were traces left behind by the ancient sword cultivator and formation cultivator's duel. It was extremely dangerous. Although some people said that if a cultivator could come out of there alive, his sword technique would definitely improve greatly. In time, he would definitely be the world's #1 sword cultivator. But first, you have to be able to come out alive. Xiao Ran knew that Master never joked with him. He subconsciously straightened his back. In this moment of distraction, he did not hear Meng Qi's words clearly. He only heard her say, "Pills refined with daybreak flower juice can allow people to speak their true thoughts." Small book pavilion. Then what is this piece of stardust that was refined with the daybreak flower juice and placed here for? Shui Qingxian also asked. To see one's heart. Yin Xian said slowly. Hiss. Xiao Ran gasped and repeated, to see one's heart. He hurriedly took a step back, as if he was afraid that something would be revealed. Meng Qi could not help but smile. It's not that magical. When I first arrived here, a voice told me that our 3 external aids would be obtained through this. Huh. This time, everyone was curious. Meng Qi took a step forward and said, among the 6 of us, we can choose 3 people ourselves. And then, she pointed to the side of the stone. There was a palm-sized box of red dye that looked like ink. After pressing the ink and sticking it on the stone, we can summon the person we trust the most in our hearts. He will become our external aid this time. Meng Qi said again, of course you heard it too. Even if this person is a Mahayana powerhouse, he only has the strength of a Funshin paragon. I see. Xiao Ran nodded. He looked around and asked, then, who will do it? Qin Xiaoma shook his head and said, first, I can't do it. The person he trusted the most was right in front of him and was about to fight side by side with him. There was no need to use this thing at all. Shui Qingxian was stunned and looked into Meng Qi's eyes. The person you trust the most? Yes. Meng Qi nodded and quickly explained. It's the person you trust the most in your heart. You can completely trust him with your life. No matter what happens, you will never doubt him. She repeated what she heard. Finally, Meng Qi had a good memory and repeated it almost word for word. Then she thought for a while and said, but considering what we will encounter next, there are already 2 medical cultivators here, fellow Taoist Shui and I. My suggestion is that the best external aid we can recruit should be a Dharma cultivator or a sword cultivator. Meng Qi thought that Shui Qingxian was from the Wind League and was surrounded by medical cultivators. It was actually not very suitable for their team to recruit another medical cultivator. It was best to recruit a sword cultivator or Dharma cultivator who had stronger attacks. I can't do it. Sure enough, Shui Qingxian shook his head. But he quickly smiled bitterly and said, it's not because I can only summon a medical cultivator, but because I don't have such a person who I can completely trust and don't need to be on guard against. Meng Qi, Xiao Ran, and even Pei Mufeng and Qin Xiaoma glanced at him. There's no other way. Perhaps it was because this was the 10 Extremes mountain. No matter what he said, they would not remember it after leaving. Or perhaps it was because of the upcoming battle. Shui Qingxian also wanted to relax a little. At least he could be honest with these temporary teammates. He spread his hands and said helplessly, I'm the eldest son of the Shui family of the Wind League. As soon as he said this, Qin Xiaoma and the others understood. I don't have one either. Yin Xian's tone was indifferent. He was also the young sect master of Jingyue Heaven. Maybe he did before, but after that time, even his father, Yin Xian's heart suddenly moved. He turned and quickly glanced at Meng Qi. Then what about her? Should he trust her? Let me do it, Pei Mufeng said indifferently. He stepped forward and stood next to the Stardust Stone. He asked, you're using this, right? He paused and suddenly asked, what if someone I trust is in the Earth Barracks? Your junior brother? Meng Qi suddenly thought of something and asked, Su Zijuan? Yes. Pei Mufeng nodded. Is that so? Meng Qi had not thought about this before. She hesitated slightly and quickly called out, Senior, are you still there? Senior? I'm here. After a while, just as Meng Qi was about to call out again, a voice sounded. What? This voice belonged to the person who gave Meng Qi the red karmic fire lotus in the first stage of the poison swamp. May I ask what will happen if the reinforcements we call out are from the Earth Barracks? Meng Qi asked. It won't happen. Meng Qi gently stuck out her tongue. She had already realized that this senior's temper had obviously become much more irritable when they met again this time. Even if you pull 3 people over from there, the outcome will be the same. So hurry up and die, the person said again. Meng Qi spread her hands with a helpless expression. She actually did not hate this senior, except that his words were a bit strange. In terms of sarcasm, he was not as good as Ji Wujiao. Moreover, the other party had given her enough benefits. If it were not for that red karmic fire lotus, perhaps she would have been trapped before the start of the second stage with no way out. After that person finished speaking, he disappeared. Pei Mufeng reached out and gently pressed on the box, then reached out and pressed on the stardust. Specks of starlight flew out from the stardust stone and entered his chest. Soon, those specks of starlight flew out of his chest and returned to the stardust. With a soft whoosh, a tall and handsome young man walked out of the stardust. Senior brother? Su Zijuan looked at everyone in surprise. Fellow Taoist Ming? Fellow Taoist Shui? You guys, why am I here? In short, you're now one of us, Meng Qi said. This? Su Zijuan was still confused. Pei Mufeng led him to the side. I'll explain. You guys continue. Okay. Meng Qi nodded. Su Zijuan was also someone who had fought side by side in the Starfall Sea. It was great that Pei Mufeng trusted him so much. Then, Meng Qi looked at Xiao Ran. This was an expert from the space-breaking sect. It would be good if another sword cultivator could come. Can you? Meng Qi asked. Xiao Ran choked for a moment. I can, but he didn't know how to explain it to Meng Qi. Then you go first. Meng Qi waved his hand. Please. But Xiao Ran took a step forward and looked at the red box hesitantly. What's wrong? Meng Qi asked. It's, Xiao Ran said. Before we came here, the person at senior said was at most at the peak of the spirit's severing stage. Yes. Meng Qi nodded. I'll tell you the truth. The person I trust is very strong now, really strong. But I don't know what he'll be like when he's at the peak of the spirit's severing stage. Xiao Ran was a bit cautious. He really didn't dare to relax at all when it came to junior sister Meng Qi. And to be honest, he was nervous when he thought about how he might call for reinforcements. It's okay. This time, it was Pei Mufeng who spoke. The peak of the spirit's severing stage is enough. He had already quickly explained the whole matter to his junior brother and walked back side by side with Su Zijuan. Then, Xiao Ran put his hand into the box and gritted his teeth. Then I'll call for reinforcements. Meng Qi. When they first met this Xiao Ran, he was following behind the powerful sect leader Ling Ji from the space-breaking sect. He looked very strong and cold, but he wasn't. Xiao Ran's hand was already on the stardust stone. The same specks of starlight danced. Then, with a soft swoosh, a man in a green robe strode out of the stardust stone. Meng Qi. Meng Qi. The person who came was wearing a green robe and a tall hat. Even though he looked to be in his 40s, his hair was still black. His handsomeness didn't lose to the younger generation here. The sleeves of his robe drooped down and covered his hands. Even though his hands were empty, this person was like the sharpest sword in the world. Even when Pei Mufeng stood in front of him, his sharpness seemed to be overshadowed by him. Xiao Ran had already turned around and bowed respectfully to the person. Master. Meng Qi didn't expect that the person Xiao Ran trusted the most was his master, the new sect leader of the space-breaking sect. Ling Ji was the one who had strangely stopped her and told her that her talent in swordsmanship wouldn't lose to anyone. Ling Ji's cold gaze swept around and finally landed on Meng Qi's face. He was startled. When he opened his mouth, his voice was slightly hoarse. Little Meng Qi. What is little Meng Qi? Meng Qi couldn't help but complain in her heart. She bowed to Ling Ji. Sect leader Ling, I'm good. Ling Ji was startled again, but still nodded. What are you guys doing? Meng Qi glanced at Xiao Ran. The young man had already retreated to the side obediently. He lowered his head and closed his eyes like an old monk in meditation. His eyes were focused on his nose, and his nose was focused on his heart. He had made up his mind not to say anything. She had no choice but to explain the whole situation quickly. Finally, she said, so we might have to trouble sect leader Ling to help us deal with the people from the Earth Barracks. It's no big deal. Ling Ji nodded indifferently and said regretfully, It's a pity that I'm only at the perfection of the spirit-severing stage. If I could reach the insightful emptiness stage, even if it's only at the first level," he raised his chin slightly. His tone was light, but full of pride. "Not to mention that there are only 100 of them. Even if there are 1,000 of them, what's there to be afraid of?" Xiao ran. Meng Qi bowed again. "Thank you, Sect Leader Ling." She stood up. The first two people were unexpectedly successful. One was Ling Ji, and the other was Su Zijuan. It could be said that their combat power had doubled. "There's one more person." Shui Qingxian looked at Meng Qi. "Meng Qi, you're coming?" Meng Qi nodded. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. Who should she choose? Xing Xing? She would definitely be very willing to go with her. Besides, Meng Qi actually trusted Li Che a lot. Even though Li Che liked Lu Qing ran a lot in her previous life, he was kind and had never hurt her. Actually, there was one more person. Meng Qi's eyelids drooped slightly. Her long eyelashes drooped, covering the light in her eyes. The person she trusted the most was naturally Qing Yanzhenjun. But no, he probably couldn't be distracted now. She couldn't disturb him either. Meng Qi thought as she raised her palm and pressed it lightly on the stardust stone. Xing Xing. She thought at her heart that Sikong Xing was the best choice. He would definitely be very happy to be with them. Bits of starlight flew out from the stardust stone and entered Meng Qi's chest. She felt a little strange, and even her chest seemed to have become much warmer. After a long time, the bits of starlight flew away from her body and entered the stardust stone. "Huh." Meng Qi suddenly heard the senior's voice again. "Naive." She quickly looked around and found that everyone was looking at her quietly. It seemed that they didn't hear the voice at all. What naive? Meng Qi was at a loss. However, before she could think more about it, the stardust stone made a soft sound and ripples appeared on the mirror-like stone. A slender hand stretched out from the stone. The hand definitely didn't look like a woman's hand. It was clean, beautiful, and the nails were neatly trimmed. However, it was obviously much bigger than Sikong Xing's hand. Meng Qi's heart jumped to her throat. Thump, thump, thump. It instantly beat very fast. The girl in red didn't appear as she imagined. After the hand, what followed was a corner of a white-robed sleeve. Before Meng Qi could think more, the white-robed man had already strode out of the stardust stone. Qing Yanzhenjun. Meng Qi heard the senior's voice again. "Haha, I said it's the person I trust the most, so it's the person I trust the most. Little brat, this is Shurju Mountain. Do you think it's a market? You still have to pick and choose for yourself." Naive. Meng Qi. Yun Xingyan's gaze suddenly looked behind Meng Qi at the empty stone wall of the blessed enclave. Meng Qi subconsciously followed his gaze, but saw nothing. Damn, this little brat is actually getting more and more powerful. The voice suddenly exclaimed, "I'm leaving. Enjoy your 48 hours, because you'll soon realize that this is your final happiness." Ha ha ha. Amidst the extremely arrogant laughter, the voice seemed to be getting further and further away. Finally, it turned into a gentle breeze and disappeared. His last sentence was obviously heard by everyone. The few people in the blessed enclave didn't even have time to be curious about whom Meng Qi trusted the most with Yin Qingyan. They were fully alert first. Qing. Meng Qi only called out one word before quickly shutting up. She wasn't sure if Yin Qingyan would be willing to let these people know his identity and life. Yin Qingyan heard this and looked at Meng Qi. When he looked at the person from Shurju Mountain who spoke just now, his gaze was as cold as frost, causing that person to be unwilling to look directly at him. At this time, when he looked at Meng Qi, the coldness had already dissipated. It was as if spring had returned to the land, warm and genial like the spring breeze. Little Qi? Yin Qingyan looked at Meng Qi's troubled expression and called her gently. Meng Qi. She immediately shuddered. What did Qing Yanzhenjun call her? Little Qi. This. She was called Little Qi in the heavens beyond heaven, but she used to call the little white tiger Little Qi. She also knew that the little white tiger was Qing Yanzhenjun. But it was still a little strange. Ling Ji's eyes darkened. His sharp and cold gaze sized up Yin Xingyan from head to toe, as if he couldn't wait to use this gaze to pierce countless small holes in her body so that he could see her internal organs clearly. The person Meng Qi trusted the most was this guy. He couldn't tell his cultivation level. Oh, this was only the perfected spirit severing stage, which meant that his cultivation level was at least above the perfected spirit severing stage. He also knew many young cultivators who were famous in the 3,000 worlds, especially those talented youth from large sections. Ling Ji knew almost all of them. This person obviously didn't belong to any large sections. Who was he? Why did Meng Qi trust him so much? What was their relationship? Countless questions flashed through Ling Ji's mind instantly. If he didn't know that this 10 extremes mountain test should be very important to Meng Qi, he wanted to pull this guy out now and test his cultivation level first. He wanted to gain Meng Qi's trust. If he wanted to call Meng Qi Little Qi in front of him, then he had to get past him. Meng Qi looked around and suddenly realized that everyone was looking at her and Yin Qingyan. She didn't think much of it first, but the other party just called her Little Qi. Meng Qi's face turned red immediately. Qin Xiaomao, Ling Ji, Shui Chengxian, Qiao Ran. I'm a little scared. Master seems to be about to explode. Meng Qi hurriedly pulled Yun Qingyan's sleeve and led him to a corner. She also knew that this place was only so big. No matter how soft her voice was, those people should be able to hear her. However, she still lowered her voice as much as possible and quickly explained the whole thing. In the end, Meng Qi put his hands together and said apologetically, I'm sorry, Qing Yanzhenjun. I asked Xingxing to come over, but the stardust stone refined by this Tianming flower still sent you over. She raised her hands high above her head and lowered her head with a red face. I'm sorry. You must be very busy right now. I shouldn't have disturbed you. It's okay. Yun Qingyan looked at Meng Qi in amusement. His voice could tell that he was in a good mood. I haven't started yet. We will only start after you finish here. Meng Qi's eyes widened in surprise. That's right. That's why I'm completely free now. I can help you fight this round. Yin Qingyan smiled. He finally couldn't help but reach out and gently place his hand on Meng Qi's head. He rubbed her hair in a good mood. Don't worry. I'm here. We'll definitely win. Thank you, Qing Yanzhenjun. Meng Qi stammered her thanks. Actually, she had never seen Yin Qingyan like this before. Even she could tell that Yin Qingyan was in a good mood right now. If he hadn't said it himself, the fight for the Demon Lord token had not started yet. Meng Qi would even think that he had already won this fight for the Demon Lord token. Don't worry. Yin Qingyan smiled at her and rubbed her hair again. Just be good and stay by my side. As he spoke, he held Meng Qi's hand and led her toward Ling Ji and the others. Let's go. We're leaving just like that? Ling Ji didn't speak, so Qiao Ran could only take the lead for his master. Otherwise, Yin Qingyan glanced at him and asked lazily. There are more than 100 people on the other side. Qiao Ran was stunned. He didn't know why, but the other party's strength was at the peak of the spirit-severing stage, just like him. But standing in front of this person, he felt as if he was standing in front of his master who was at full strength. That kind of strong and suffocating pressure. Even if this white-robed man looked lazy and didn't seem to be aggressive, he couldn't ignore it at all. Ha ha ha. This time, the laughter came from Yun Qingyan and Ling Ji at the same time. Qiao Ran. He'd better shut up obediently. Qin Xiaomao's gaze fell on Yun Qingyan and Meng Qi's hands that were holding each other. Meng Qi, who is he? He suddenly asked. This time, everyone's eyes focused on Yun Qingyan again. Meng Qi turned to look at Yun Qingyan. In her nervousness, she didn't notice that she was holding hands with the other party, looking intimate and ambiguous. I'm her Dao companion, Yun Qingyan said. What? Ling Ji almost jumped up. With a clang, his narrow, almost transparent life-bound sword immediately appeared beside him. Tell, who are you? Ling Ji's voice was colder and sharper than the blade. He looked at Yun Qingyan coldly. He definitely didn't agree to this. Just now, Qiao Ran had quickly told him what happened after entering 10 Extremes Mountain. His Meng Qi was innocent and kind. This guy had an unknown background. How could he be worthy of Meng Qi? Yin Qingyan smiled faintly. He flicked his finger, and a bit of starlight slowly rose from his fingertip. If you want to fight, then fight. He was just too lazy to fight in recent years, but he was never afraid of anyone. Meng Qi, wait. She took a breath, looked at Xiao Ran, and then looked at Qin Xiaoma and the others. She quickly said, "This is a long story. Let's talk about it after we get out." She was explaining to Qin Xiaoma. As for the others, Pei Mufeng probably wouldn't care who she became Dao companions with. Xue Qingxian, Su Zijuan, and Xiao Ran weren't very familiar with her either. As for Yin Xian, he probably couldn't be bothered with this kind of gossip. She has the final say. Yin Qingyan smiled faintly, not caring at all. Meng Qi little. Meng Qi. Ling Ji called out unwillingly. Who is he? Were you deceived by him? Deceived? Meng Qi was stunned. She subconsciously took a step forward and stood in front of Yin Qingyan, facing Ling Ji herself. She knew that Yin Qingyan was very powerful, very powerful. She also knew that Ling Ji was also very powerful. However, no matter how powerful she was, she might still be a little weaker than Yin Qingyan. Ling Ji definitely couldn't hurt her. She was completely subconscious. Before she could react, her body had already moved. He wouldn't deceive me. Meng Qi's voice was slightly low, but it was extremely firm. He definitely wouldn't, she repeated in a low voice. Ling Ji. Meng Qi's eyes were clear and calm. She looked directly at Ling Ji without fear. Actually, she was very polite. From the beginning to the end, she treated Ling Ji with the etiquette of a junior. At first, she thought that the Voidbreaker sect was looking for her with ill intentions. At this moment, she didn't mean to attack or offend her at all. However, Ling Ji inexplicably saw 2 words of determination in her clear eyes. Reverse scale. It was as if the white-robed youth she subconsciously protected behind her, who was clearly more powerful than her, was her reverse scale. Even someone as calm and elegant as Meng Qi would show her protective side when her reverse scale was touched. He was a little envious. Ling Ji suddenly exhaled softly. He knew what happened in the boundary of the Apricot Forest competition. He even knew how Meng Qi entered Cool Breeze Valley, why she left there, and how she came to this point. Perhaps this was what it meant to be pure and honest. She would protect the people she wanted to protect. She would adhere to her own path. She would return the favor with a peach. Slowly, she had these trustworthy companions who supported each other by her side. She even had a Dao companion now. Ling Ji suddenly felt a little dispirited. Meng Qi didn't need him at all. Meng Qi really didn't need him at all now. She had already relied on herself to enter the top competition among the young cultivators in the 3,000 worlds. She could stand shoulder to shoulder with Pei Mufeng, his disciple Qiao Ran, and Xue Chengxian of the Wind Alliance. When they got out of here, she wouldn't need him even more. Shizhuan. Qiao Ran suddenly called out to his Shizhuan in a low voice. Ling Ji finally came back to his senses. He looked up. Meng Qi and the others had already walked a short distance away. Only Qiao Ran was still obediently waiting beside him, who was immersed in his memories. Let's go. Ling Ji waved his hand, and his life bond longsword returned to his spiritual sea. Yes. Qiao Ran walked beside him respectfully. It was a little quiet along the way. Meng Qi and Yin Qingyan walked side by side. Pei Mufeng and Su Zijuan walked on the left and right respectively. Their life bond long swords also floated on their sides. Qin Xiaoma walked silently on the other side of Meng Qi, slightly further away from her, and Yin Qingyan. Xue Chengxian was a little behind the two. About 3 steps behind him was Yin Xian. Ling Ji and Xiao Ran were at the back, some distance away from everyone. Shizhuan. Qiao Ran secretly glanced at his Shizhuan. In fact, his Shizhuan didn't deliberately hide the matter between Meng Qi and his Shizhuan, so he could more or less guess. He had followed Ling Ji for a long time and had always been the disciple he admired the most. Ling Ji treated him very well, so he could more or less guess his Shizhuan's thoughts. What's the matter? Ling Ji asked lightly. His tone sounded rather forced, as if he had lost interest in everything in an instant. In my first year, I was the last in the 700 disciples assessment, but Shizun liked me and took me in. I have always been grateful, Qiao Ran suddenly said. You have talent. I can see your talent. It's nothing, Ling Ji said. My talent gradually showed after practicing the sword for a year, Qiao Ran said. But in the first major assessment, 3 months after entering the sect, no one was willing to take me in. In the assessment half a year later, I still failed. In the assessment in September, no one was interested in me, and I was the last in the assessment again. Qiao Ran smiled bitterly. Later, Shizun also said that my perseverance was also one of my talents. He wasn't a true genius like Yin Xian, Pei Mufeng, or Qin Xiuma here. He wasn't the kind of genius who would amaze people as soon as he stepped onto the path of cultivation. In the first year of Qiao Ran's sword cultivation, he was looked down upon. If it wasn't for his extremely firm mind, he would have almost given up. Then now, there probably wasn't the first disciple of the Broken Void sect who finally mastered his sword arts and completed his natal sword, shocking the entire West Kingdom with a single sword strike. So he could actually understand Ling Ji's sudden desolation. Geniuses almost never suffered setbacks. For example, when he was young, his Shizun Ling Ji had once shocked the world with a single sword strike, causing countless beauties and experts to scramble for him. He probably never experienced the feeling of being unappreciated and unvalued when he was willing to show goodwill. Ling Ji suddenly froze. He stopped walking and turned to look at his disciple. Qiao Ran didn't dare to raise his head, only daring to quietly look at the tip of his shoes. Ling Ji suddenly reached out and patted Qiao Ran's shoulder, striding forward. Little Meng Qi. Ling Ji walked to Meng Qi's side, pushing Qin Xiuma to the side. What are your plans? Meng Qi turned to look at him. Seeing Ling Ji's expression return to normal, he said, We're going to go take a look at the situation at the Earth Barracks. As they spoke, the group had already followed the mountain path to the mountain peak. The paradise they were at just now was originally very close to the mountain peak. At this time, the 9 people walked to the edge of the cliff at the mountain peak, overlooking the earth, feeling full of pride. Then, Meng Qi couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Opposite them was another mountain, but that mountain was much shorter. The mountain peak was a large piece of flat land, on which stood a small city. Although the city wasn't big, it had city walls, watchtowers, everything one could think of. In addition, the mountain path was steep, and the city was surrounded by cliffs on 3 sides. Only one side had a road leading to the city. The terrain looked very steep, easy to defend, and difficult to attack. This is a bit of a joke. Qiao Ran had already returned to normal. He was more familiar with the others now. Even in front of Master, he was much more lively than when Meng Qi first met him. There are defensive Dharma treasures on the city walls, Su Zijuan said. He was also a member of the Earth Barracks and had stayed in the city before. You can use Dharma treasures to activate the defensive array on the city walls. The array is very old. There are also disciples of the Heavenly Sea Pavilion and the Broken Space sect in the Earth Barracks, but they can't recognize what the array is. They only know that its defensive ability is very strong, and I'm afraid it's very difficult to break. Meng Qi. She silently glanced at Yin Qingyan. In front of probably the strongest array master in the world, there wouldn't be an array that couldn't be broken. Even if it was an array against an array, she believed that Yin Qingyan wouldn't lose. Receiving her gaze, Yin Qingyan lowered his hand and held her hand again. Meng Qi blushed again. She still felt that it was a bit strange. In front of so many people, holding hands with Qing Yan's and Jun, there was a kind of... She couldn't describe it. It wasn't hate, nor was it fear. In short, it was very, very strange. It made her feel that she should break free, but she also felt that there was nothing wrong with holding hands like this, as long as he was happy. Yin Qingyan was obviously happy. He waved his hand. The array is nothing to worry about. Su Zijuan, he looked at his senior brother. He didn't know how to respond. That's right. Ling Ji also stepped forward and stood on the other side of Meng Qi. He looked down at the city and said nonchalantly, The array is nothing to worry about. Su Zijuan, he knew who Ling Ji was. He was the big shot who injured 5 of his senior brothers with a long sword and took the position of sect master of the Voidbreaker sect that had been vacant for 10 years. He was also the one who shocked the 4 realms when he was young. Even though the Voidbreaker sect was known for its sword array, he still single-handedly suppressed all the sword cultivators of the same generation in the 3 realms. All right, he was nothing to worry about. Su Zijuan was silent for a moment and continued. There are 3 main checkpoints in the city. Not counting the defensive array on the city wall, there's a stone pillar at each of the 4 gates. The east, west, north, and south are connected and can release different spells, wind, rain, thunder, and lightning, with amazing power. Further in, there's a poison array formed by poisonous insects and flowers. Inside the poison array is a sword array, and the sword array is guarding the city lord's mansion. Su Zijuan said in one breath, according to rules, we have to get the city lord's mansion to successfully attack the city. So, he paused for a moment. Actually, he shouldn't be the one to speak here, but he was the only one who went into the city. Fortunately, he was here. Otherwise, the attackers would definitely be attacked by the wind, rain, thunder, and lightning spell stone pillars as soon as they attacked the city. Even if they were lucky enough to enter the city, they would easily fall into the trap of the poison array. Not to mention, there is still the extremely powerful sword array behind. Then don't we have to wait here for 48 hours and wait for the situation to change? It would be easier for us to defend the city? Shui Chengxian frowned. Why did he feel that this sounded like an impossible mission to complete? Even if they added the 3 reinforcements, they only had 9 people here. I'm afraid not. Su Zijuan shook his head. The defensive array, spell stone pillars, poison array, and sword array are indeed powerful. But they all need cultivators to activate. We have too few people. He explained, for example, the spell stone pillars of the wind, rain, thunder, and lightning spell stone pillars. If we want them to help us attack the enemy, each stone pillar needs 4 people to inject spirit energy at the same time to activate the power inside. It's the same for the arrays on the 4 city walls. Each wall needs 3 people. The poison array needs 6 people, and the sword array needs 9 people. Su Zijuan said, if there are only 9 of us, we can only retreat and defend the sword array. But if there are too many of them, the sword array can't continue to protect us if one of us is injured. He shook his head. If there are too few people, those things won't work. No wonder we attacked the city first. Shui Chengxian pondered and said, one of the rules is that if the people we injured are saved by Meng Qi or me, they will be considered as people on our side. This way, we can use the 48 hours to think of a way to increase the number of people on our side. Qin Xiaoma said, if we gather the power of 9 people, we can attack 1 wall. That's right. Shui Chengxian nodded. The 5 of us can attack 1 wall. Yin Xian suddenly said. The 3 of them were all nurtured as future sect masters by the sect. They were quite talented in commanding. They know we have 9 people on our side. If all 9 of us attack together, they won't have anything to worry about. They don't need to defend the city lord's mansion, the sword array, or the poison array. They don't even need to defend the other 3 walls. Yin Xian said, they have more people. This is disadvantageous for us. That's right. Shui Chengxian nodded. Other than Ling Ji, Xiao Ran, and Yin Xinyan, everyone here knew the reason why Yin Xian was injured. He naturally wouldn't look down on the young master of Mirror Moon Heaven, who was only a Qi refinement realm. Shui Chengxian pondered for a moment and said, me, Dao is Qin, Sect Master Pei, Dao is Su, and he turned to look at Ling Ji. He didn't dare to command the Sect Master of Broken Space Sect, their senior. Me? Ling Ji said. Are you sure you want me to appear from the start? He suddenly curled his lips and looked at Shui Chengxian with a smile that wasn't a smile. Are you sure you don't want to give them a surprise? If Senior suddenly appears and attacks one of the walls, they will definitely be very surprised. Shui Chengxian bowed respectfully to Ling Ji. This way, we might be able to take advantage of them. This can also be considered a surprise, right? He said politely to Ling Ji. Moreover, When they see Senior here, they won't immediately remember that Senior's cultivation is currently sealed at the perfected spirit severing stage. With Senior's reputation, we should be able to catch them off guard. All right. Ling Ji nodded slightly. Suddenly, he glanced at Yin Qingyan. You come with me, he suddenly said. All right. Yin Qingyan also nodded. Then, Little Qi replaced Shui Chengxian. He slightly raised his chin at Shui Chengxian. This, Shui Chengxian muttered. Even if Ling Ji was here, even if they could catch the other party off guard, the other party had more than 10 times their number after all. He was a little worried about Meng Qi. All right, Meng Qi had already nodded. But Meng Qi, before Shui Chengxian could finish speaking, Yin Qingyan had already interrupted him. He looked at the eldest son of the Shui family of the Wind Alliance. He was the master of the heavens beyond heaven. No rumors in the 3,000 worlds could escape his ears. Moreover, Shui Chengxian, this brat, rolled his eyes. Even if he was blind, he wouldn't be able to see that he harbored ill intentions towards Meng Qi. I personally taught her. Yin Qingyan's tone was slightly cold. He looked at Shui Chengxian with a faint smile. She's more useful than you. Shui Chengxian, moreover, Yin Qingyan said, in the face of such an array attack, I can still protect her. His tone even sounded a little arrogant. If it were someone else, Shui Chengxian might feel that the other party was a little arrogant. However, he had also come out of the Starfall Sea with Meng Qi and the others. From the words of Su Junmo and Sikong Xing, he had already vaguely guessed the identity of the man who had an ambiguous relationship with Meng Qi. Shui Chengxuan's hands clenched slightly at his sides, but he quickly relaxed them. There was no trace of unhappiness on his face. If this was really the important person he guessed, as the future master of the Shui family, he couldn't be offended, even for the sake of the family. All right. He was silent for a moment before replying in a deep voice. Yin Qingyan seemed to have guessed that he would do this. He smiled lightly and walked to the edge of the cliff with Meng Qi's hand. Wind, rain, thunder, and lightning pillars, then the poisonous insect array, then the sword array. He whispered to Meng Qi, what do you think? Did DXS calm the four extremes? Meng Qi blurted out in a low voice. That's right. Yin Qingyan smiled faintly and looked down at the city. He spoke to Meng Qi in a gentle tone, but his gaze wasn't soft at all. It's a little interesting. Also, he suddenly paused. Meng Qi waited for a moment, but didn't hear anything else. He subconsciously asked, what? He doesn't like you. Yin Qingyan's voice was even lower. What he loves most is his family, power, and status, and probably the position of the future leader of the Wind Alliance. Chapter 158. Yes. Meng Qi didn't think carefully about the meaning behind Yin Qingyan's words, and nodded obediently almost immediately. She didn't really care what kind of person Shui Chengxian was. Moreover, he himself said that he was the eldest son of the Wind Alliance's Shui family. Meng Qi could more or less guess that the responsibility that he carried was definitely different from that of a loose practitioner without a sect like her. Yin Qingyan smiled slightly and turned to look down at the foot of the mountain again. If it were you, what would you do now? He asked Meng Qi. Oh, Meng Qi thought seriously and said, I can't think of a better way, but I have to test the other party's strength first. She paused and said, the other party has more people than us, and we have 2 medical practitioners, Shui Chengxian and I, who aren't strong. If we attack forcefully, we'll definitely be at a disadvantage. But she thought of the seniors and the checkpoints that she met after entering the 10 Extremes Mountain and said, I keep feeling that the 10 Extremes Mountain is a bit strange. What do you mean? Yin Qingyan asked. I keep feeling that it's a bit different from what we imagined. Meng Qi naturally told him everything she knew. Since entering the 10 Extremes Mountain, I've been thinking about how to climb. Although the outside world doesn't know what will happen in the 10 Extremes Mountain, there have always been rumors that there will be rewards for those who can climb to the top of the 10 Extremes Mountain. A Funshin Xiuzha can even directly advance to the Dongshu realm, crossing a realm. This was also the reason why Meng Qi came here. Her current cultivation speed was too slow. If she could really enter the next realm after leaving the 10 Extremes mountain, as the rumors said, that would naturally be the best for her. It's probably because everyone heard the word mountain, they all thought about how to climb as high as possible and felt that the test here should be like that. But now it seems... Meng Qi frowned slightly and said her thoughts honestly. It seems to be a bit different from what we imagined. Yan Xian can pass the 3 tests with his cultivation of lianqi. And every seemingly fair test will always have other things happen after it ends. For example, the drunken dragon grass from before or the current 10 Extremes mountain battle. Meng Qi continued, and those elusive seniors. I always feel that this place is not testing our cultivation, but testing something else. Go on. Yun Qingyan nodded slightly and motioned for Meng Qi to continue. Qing, Yanzhenjun. Meng Qi suddenly remembered. She tiptoed closer to Yun Qingyan and whispered into his ear, I got a red lotus of hellfire. Probably because he was a medical cultivator, Meng Qi always had a faint medicinal fragrance on his body. It was slightly bitter, but also very refreshing. Yun Qingyan felt hot air blowing against her ear. Her heart skipped a beat, and she tilted her head to look at Meng Qi. She was half a head shorter than him. When she stood up straight, the top of her head could barely reach Yun Qingyan's chin. When she tiptoed, she was only slightly closer to his ear. And Yun Qingyan reached out and pressed Meng Qi's head. Her soft hair brushed against his palm. I know. Meng Qi was pressed back to the ground. The other's hand was still on her head. She could only tilt her head to look at Yun Qingyan and whispered, This should be a very good reward in 10 Extremes Mountain, right? Yes. The white-robed man nodded with certainty. So I always feel that this matter is not as simple as it seems on the surface. This time, we're divided into 2 camps. On the surface, it seems that we are to mercilessly kill each other. But Meng Qi hesitated. If the use of pills and talismans is the same as outside 10 Extremes Mountain, then what about the attack techniques? Are the Xiozha who died in this battle of 10 Extremes Mountain really just sent out of 10 Extremes Mountain and unable to continue participating in this battle of 10 Extremes Mountain? Meng Qi asked 2 questions in one breath. Yun Qingyan did not answer her. He only muttered to himself for a moment, and then said, Continue. Then if we kill the fellow Taoists in the Earth Barracks, they will directly die. After leaving 10 Extremes Mountain, no one will remember what happened here. Then after leaving here, no one will know why those fellow Taoists died. The Xiozha sent here by the 3,000 realms came from the 10 great sects of the 4 realms. To them, these disciples are the geniuses of their sects, their future hope. Those sects that had disciples die in 10 Extremes Mountain, will they really treat it as if nothing happened? The corner of Yun Qingyan's mouth raised slightly, and he looked at Meng Qi with a smile that was not a smile. Then there will be suspicion and suspicion between the sects that originally had cracks in them. Once the seed of suspicion is planted, new conflicts will arise. After a dozen years, maybe the 2 sects will already be in a situation where only one side will be able to live. His voice paused slightly, and his tone was indifferent. As for what exactly happened back then, no one will mention it again. Yun Qingyan looked at Meng Qi. Is that what you mean? Meng Qi nodded embarrassedly. She did mean that, but she did not say it as directly as Yun Qingyan. She only faintly felt that the test of 10 Extremes Mountain would not be so simple. The drunken dragon grass before had the intention of instigating them to kill each other. The great battle now was practically written on the surface that they were going to fight. Meng Qi looked down at the city where the Earth Barracks was located from above. Not to mention the conditions that the woman had mentioned before. Each of them caused distrust towards each other. The Xiozha of the Heaven Barracks could go to the Earth Barracks, and the Xiozha of the Earth Barracks could come to the Heaven Barracks. If that was the case, everyone might have their own selfish motives and make their own plans. Meng Qi usually did not think too much about these things, but it was not like she did not understand. Right now, she really wanted to pass the test of 10 Extremes Mountain. She wanted to become strong as quickly as possible, so she thought more. What are you talking about? Ling Ji's voice suddenly sounded behind the 2. Meng Qi turned her head and saw a green-robed male striding over. Sect leader Ling, she hurriedly bowed to him. "No need to be so polite, little Meng Qi." Ling Ji waved his hand and stood to her right to look with her at the little city where the Earth Barracks was. "Are you worried?" Ling Ji asked. "A little," Meng Qi said. "Don't be afraid." Ling Ji raised his hand. After a moment of hesitation, he still put it on Meng Qi's shoulder. "With me here, no one will harm you." "Many thanks, sect leader Ling," Meng Qi said politely. Actually, Ling Ji looked at her elegant little face. Her black hair was simply pulled up and pinned on her head with an inky jade hairpin. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down. His voice was slightly hoarse. "Actually, you don't have to be so polite to me. I and your mother are old acquaintances. You can call me uncle." Meng Qi. She herself didn't even know who her mother was. Was Ling Ji sure he didn't get the wrong person? "Just call me Uncle Ling," Ling Ji said. "You don't have to keep calling me sect leader. It's too formal." Meng Qi, the number of times she and Ling Ji met could be counted on one hand. The two of them weren't very close to begin with. Meng Qi actually vaguely guessed the reason why the other party would treat her like this. Ling Ji's performance was too obvious, especially in Mirror Moon City. He said that her talent in swordsmanship would also be very strong. But even if she guessed it, it didn't mean that she would do anything. Whether it was the 3,000 worlds, the demon world, or the devil world, cultivators were indifferent to relationships. Many Dao companions would only help each other cultivate. They wouldn't have children and wouldn't usually be together. Even if they had children, there wouldn't necessarily be a scene of a father being kind and a son being filial. The more likely situation was that one of the parents was cultivating in seclusion. By the time they came out of seclusion, more than 10 years might have passed. The children hadn't seen each other for many years. Naturally, their feelings for each other would be limited. Sect leader Ling, Meng Qi hesitated for a moment before calling out. "Uncle Ling," Ling Ji insisted. "It's just a name. You don't have to be so polite." "Meng Qi, we can prepare to make a move." The one who spoke was Pain Mufeng. Shui Chengxian would never be the first to interrupt Ling Ji at this time. "Xiao Ren didn't dare to." Ling Ji looked deeply at Meng Qi. Then, she turned to the people who gathered around her and said, "Okay, then we'll do as we said just now. Senior Ling, Meng Qi, Sect Leader Pei, fellow Taoist Qin, and..." Shui Chengxian saw Ling Ji agree and said, "This is Yin Qingyan." Yin Qingyan said, "Yes, fellow Taoist Yin." Shui Chengxian looked at Yin Qingyan thoughtfully. The other party stood at the edge of the cliff at the top of the mountain. His long robe fluttered in the mountain wind. It was like a full sail. The aura on his body was only at the peak of the spirit-severing stage. However, when he stood next to a senior like Ling Ji, who had been famous for a long time, he was not suppressed by the other party's aura at all. Just this alone was something that none of the others here could do. Yin Qingyan's gaze swept across Shui Chengshuan's face. He was suddenly shocked. He quickly came back to his senses and continued, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, fellow Taoist Yin, and I will not appear for the time being. This will make them hesitate. I'll go in place of Sect Leader Pei." Yin Xian, who had been silent all this time, suddenly said, Shui Chengxian was stunned. He was the eldest son of the Shui clan. He knew very well about Yin Xian. He did not feel that the current sect leader of Mirror Moon Heaven, who was only at the Qi disciple stage, was not strong enough. However, respecting and admiring the other party was one thing. Right now, they were going to attack the Earth Barracks walls that had formations helping to defend them. Bringing a Qi disciple stage cultivator would only be a shortcoming. Shui Chengxian hesitated for a moment. He immediately smiled and said, "In that case, fellow Taoist Yin will go in place of Sect Leader Pei." He did not ask if Yin Xian was confident. He also did not ask how the other party, who was only at the Qi disciple stage, was going to fight. It was as if it was just a normal person. If Yin Xian was willing to go, then let him go. This was a matter of course. After all, before Yin Xian was injured, his reputation as a genius was above Pei Mufeng's. "Can you?" Meng Qi said. He had already reached out and touched Yin Xian's wrist. "Don't you have no spirit energy?" she directly asked. "We only have 3 lives." Meng Qi reminded Yin Xian. She did not doubt that Yin Xian wanted to die 3 times to go to the other party's camp. Someone as proud as Yin Xian would never do such a thing. Moreover, if Yin Xian could go to the other party's camp, then he would not have chosen to wander around Mirror Moon City. He would not have been willing to return to his own sect. Shui Qingxian, he could not help but look at Meng Qi and then at Yin Xian. "You have a way?" Pei Mufeng asked directly. "Yes." Yin Xian nodded. He spread his hand, and a golden lotus bloomed in his palm. "This is..." Shui Changxian stared at the golden lotus for a moment. Suddenly, he sucked in a breath of cold air. "This is the red karmic fire lotus." He could not believe his eyes. This was the legendary true treasure of heaven and earth. It was said that as long as a person was not dead and still had a breath of life, a red karmic fire lotus could be placed in that person's spirit sea to prevent that person from dying. Not only that, it was said that the red karmic fire lotus could help people pass through tribulations. It was one of the rare treasures of heaven and earth in the 3 realms that could help people pass through tribulations. However, this thing was too rare. It was rare for one to appear in hundreds of years. After a long time, it became a real thing of legend. "My inner core was damaged, so my spirit sea is empty." Yin Xian had nothing to hide in front of these people. The red karmic fire lotus can temporarily replace the inner core. It's also possible to attack. He said, "The other party doesn't know that I can attack. With Senior Ling Ji here, they will definitely be caught off guard." Yin Xian turned to look at Pei Mufeng and the others. "They will definitely focus all their attention on the 5 of us. At this time, we have Brother Pei, Brother Su, Brother Shui, and Brother Qiao. Both Brother Su and Brother Qiao are sword cultivators, and Brother Shui is a medical cultivator. It will be good if we can bring back 1 or 2 people." "Yes." Shui Chengxian nodded. His previous plan was to let the 5 of them appear and the remaining 4 hide. This way, the other party would be wary and would not dare to attack the city walls with all their strength. In reality, it was slightly wasteful, but there was no way around it. With Yin Xian present, they had to divert some attention to protect him. Otherwise, with Yin Xian's cultivation, he would easily be killed 3 times. This way, Yin Xian would take up a chance to go to Earth Barracks. Secondly, they already had very few people on their side. This would unintentionally make things worse. Even if Yin Xian's cultivation stopped at Lianqi after being wounded, he was still the young sect master of Mirror Moon Heaven. If he was killed 3 times, their morale would drop greatly. "All right," Shui Chengxian exhaled. "Then this will be it." "Which wall?" Ling Ji saw the people had been decided and asked. Yin Xian took a step forward and narrowed his eyes slightly as he looked at the city below. They were on the west side of the city, facing the west side of the city. The northwest and east sides of the city were all cliffs. Only the south side was not so steep. They could see a mountain path that curved from the foot of the mountain to the city. For Xiuzhe, any side was the same. It was not like walking on flat ground, but even the Meng Qi did not care about cliffs. It is good for them that the city is not large. While everyone was observing, Shui Chengxian said, "No matter which wall finds us, they can hurry over in the shortest amount of time. So right now, there is no focus on defense. There's almost no cover from here to the other side's city, so we can go from any side, but we have to be fast." Shui Changxian continued, "Since we cannot hide our tracks, then speed is the best way to hide." "Oh," Yin Qingyan suddenly spoke. "It is not hard to open a formation and hide the tracks of 5 people." He said calmly. Shui Chingxian, he only had a faint guess at Yin Qingyan's identity, but he did not know what the other's strongest aspect was. If Yin Qingyan was really the big shot of the demon world that he thought, the other party had been famous for a long time and was famous for being mysterious. The legend of the 3,000 worlds about the fight between him and others was already 100 years ago. Shui Changxian was only in his 20s. Not to mention him, even his father could only be considered this person's junior. He did not even know whether this big shot of the demon world was a spell cultivator or a sword cultivator. Xue Qingxian remembered that Yin Qingyin seemed to have said that Meng Qi was taught by him personally. But no matter how he thought about it, he felt that it was strange. Wasn't Meng Qi a medical cultivator like him? Then what did he teach her? The medical skills of the demon world? And what did he mean by opening a formation? Xue Qingxuan's head was full of questions, but he did not ask Yin Qingyin. Instead, he smiled and said, "So, Senior Yin means Senior Yin?" Yin Qingyin looked at Xue Qingxian with a faint smile. "You call me Senior?" Xue Qingxian, "That's true." Yin Qingyin waved his sleeves and said, "I've met your great-grandfather once, and even he has to call me Senior." "Yes." Xue Qingxian bowed respectfully to him. "This junior has heard the elders in my family mention it. Meng Qi is my Dao companion, so you should also call him Senior." Yin Qingyin ignored his politeness and said lightly, "Xue Qingxian, Meng Qi." This time, even Qin Xiaoma, Xiao Ran, and the others could tell that this powerful cultivator from the demon world did not like Xue Qingxian. But thinking about it, no one would be happy if their Dao companion was coveted by the Xue family for such a reason. "Huh." Yin Qingyin chuckled. He was clearly in a good mood. Ling Ji's lips could not help but curl up. He did not dislike Xue Qingxian so much. After all, he was the eldest son of the Xue family, and he was the same kind of person as Meng Qi. In his eyes, he was much more reliable than Yin Qingyin, whose background was unknown. "Brother Yin, can you explain it more clearly?" Qin Xiaoma asked. "Formation? It's very simple." Yin Qingyin raised his right hand and quickly drew a line in the air. His fingers were long and slender, and his posture was beautiful and swift. In the blink of an eye, a formation with a faint white light appeared in the air. Yin Qingyin flicked his fingers, and a few Xian spirit stones were embedded in the formation. He flicked his sleeves, grabbed Meng Qi's shoulder, and stepped into the formation with him. Qin Xiaoma and the others widened their eyes. It was just a step, but the two of them and the formation disappeared into thin air before everyone's eyes. Not only did their figures disappear, but even their auras were concealed. Meng Qi and Yin Qingyin seemed to have completely disappeared and left this place. Just as everyone was stunned, Yin Qingyin appeared in front of everyone again with Meng Qi. They seemed to have stepped out of the void. From their disappearance to their reappearance, they seemed so natural and relaxed. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. It was not that they had never heard of the legends of the 3,000 Worlds Array cultivators. However, weapon cultivators have been declining for tens of thousands of years. Even if Heavenly Sea Pavilion obtained some ancient sect inheritance a few hundred years ago, they only made some progress in weapon refinement. Ling Ji's gaze suddenly became incomparably deep. He quietly looked at Yin Qingyin. After a long while, he slowly retracted his gaze. This person's background was quite extraordinary. "That's it," Yin Qingyin said. "How about it?" Of course it's excellent." Xue Qingxian composed himself and said, "In this case, we can attack any side of the city wall. CXCWW. Kami paused and said, "Why don't you all go to the south side of the city, and we'll go directly to the west side of the city." The south side of the city was the only place to go up the mountain. Logically speaking, they had fewer people. If they wanted to attack the other side by surprise, they would not choose the south side of the city. The cultivators of the Earth Barracks probably also thought that they would not choose this side. Presumably, the defense here should be the most lax. In that case, let's depart now. Xue Qingxian took a deep breath and said, "After 2 hours, no matter what the result is, let's all return here and regroup. The other side has more people than us, and they also have the help of the formations in the city. Everyone must be careful. The 4 of us will go down the mountain first." Xue Qingxian looked at Meng Qi and then went down the mountain first with Xiao Ran and Pei Mufeng. This person is quite talented. He knows when to yield and when to stand tall. After the 4 walked far away, Ling Ji looked at Xue Qingxuan's back and said, "Just now, Yin Qingyin had almost embarrassed Xue Qingxian in front of him. Even though he did not have any ill intentions, it still put him on the spot. He only paused for a moment and then immediately returned to normal. When he spoke again, even his tone did not change. It was rare to have such a temperament at such a young age. It seemed that the Wind Alliance's goal was not small. Ling Ji did not say this out loud. He only thought silently in his heart. Let's depart as well. Qin Xiaoma said. All right. Pei Mufeng nodded. They all stood under Yun Qingyan's formation and rushed down the mountain. Meng Qi stood under the formation and looked at the faint white light falling down beside him. This formation, her mind moved slightly. This was something that Yun Qingyan had taught her. It could hide a cultivator's presence. It was extremely useful for medical cultivators who were not strong in battle. When they encountered danger, they might be able to escape with this. However, Meng Qi's cultivation had been too low at the time. This formation would have been easily seen through by enemies with higher cultivation than her. So she had almost never used it. Now that she saw Yun Qingyan use it, she was walking next to him and the faint white light from the formation protecting them. Her heart suddenly surged. Qingyan's Zhenjun really did not hide anything from her. Meng Qi's mind moved. She looked down at Yun Qingyan's hand hanging by his side. Not only did he save her and accompany her, but he also taught her everything he knew without hiding anything. How could there be such a good person in this world? And she even met him. No wonder she was always misunderstood and wronged in the past. She did good things, but in the end, there were often no good results. It was probably because she used up all her luck to meet Yun Qingyan. Meng Qi felt her heart suddenly clear. To be honest, she was still somewhat dissatisfied with what happened in her previous life. After all, she saved people, but she was always misunderstood and hurt by the people she had treated. It was really not a pleasant thing. But when she thought about how it was all for the sake of meeting Yun Qingyan, those misunderstandings and hurt didn't seem to matter. Meng Qi's hand suddenly brushed against a warm skin. She looked down and saw Yun Qingyan's slender fingertips brushing against her wrist. Just as he was about to leave, his fingers curled slightly and gently scratched Meng Qi's palm. Meng Qi, she couldn't help but smile. Her heart was filled with a strange feeling. That feeling was very strange. It wasn't all happiness or satisfaction, but it made her feel like she was stepping on clouds with every step she took. Even her heart became soft. She felt that everything she saw was bright sunshine. Careful. Yin Xian lowered his voice. The four of them have already arrived. Pei Mufeng and the others had already reached the foot of the mountain. Because the mountain where the Earth Barracks was located, other than the south side, the four sides were all steep cliffs. So the foot of the mountain was the best place to hide. Pei Mufeng and the others leaned against the mountain wall. The Xiozha in the city on the mountain couldn't see them. Meng Qi took a deep breath and expelled the distracting thoughts from her mind. What she needed to do now was become strong, work hard to become strong. Only when she was strong enough could she. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were extremely clear. Meng Qi's fingers brushed across her storage bag. The silver medicine knife was already in her hand. She held a handful of Xianling stones in her left hand. The five-spirit cauldron had left her Ling Si and turned into a palm-sized cauldron that floated by her head. With two soft sounds, Qin Xiaoma and Ling Ji's life bond long swords floated out and floated around the five people. Yin Xian's left hand opened. A crescent moon rose from his palm. He was the young sect master of Mirror Moon Heaven. His life bond talisman was also in the shape of a crescent moon. Before he was injured, Yin Xian was invincible among his peers in the area where this crescent moon lit up. Now that the moon had been covered in dust for 2 years, it finally saw the light of day again. The life bond talisman that was connected to its master's mind trembled slightly, as though it was overjoyed. This time, even Ling Ji and Yun Qingyan looked at Yin Xian, especially Yun Qingyan. A hint of surprise flashed through his eyes. However, he quickly retracted his gaze and said to Meng Qi, "Be careful later." He paused and then said, "The formation of the city gate is only for defense. The wind, rain, thunder, and lightning after entering the city will attack people. However, there are small sword formations and small formations inside the sentry towers on the city walls." "Yes." Meng Qi nodded. They could all hear Yin Qingyin's words. The sword formations and formations inside the sentry towers are not strong. They are about the same as a nascent soul cultivator's attack. Therefore, they may not use those sentry towers. He continued. However, from the materials and positions of the 4 city walls, the sentry towers should be another formation. Meng Qi's mind suddenly moved. Then when it's time for us to defend the city, can't we use these sentry towers? She hurriedly asked. Huh, Ling Ji said with a smile. They have to be able to last until then, little Meng Qi. That's right, Yin Qingyin also said lightly. Meng Qi, Qin Xiaoma, Yin Xian, Meng Qi was still all right. Qin Xiaoma and Yin Xian were both geniuses of the younger generation who had become famous since they were young. They thought they were arrogant enough. However, compared to these 2 seniors, they really couldn't compare. In any case, the atmosphere between the 5 of them was quite relaxed under the formation. They, including Meng Qi, were not slow. Soon, they reached the foot of the mountain. I'll take you up. As Yin Qingyin spoke, she had already put her arm around Meng Qi's shoulder. Let's go. Yin Xian nodded. The 5 of them only stopped at the foot of the mountain for a moment before they immediately rose from the ground. Meng Qi felt a warmth on her shoulder. The wind had already blown past her ears. Yin Qingyin didn't seem to be very fast. However, in the blink of an eye, the ground at the foot of the mountain was already far away from them. The small city of the Earth Barracks at the top of the mountain suddenly appeared in front of her. Whoosh whoosh. The first to make a move were actually Qin Xiaoma and Ling Ji. Qin Xiaoma was at the cloud trampling peak. They cultivated both sword techniques and sword techniques, but their main attack method was still the longsword. However, they could bestow sorcery attributes to their longswords. Every time they swung their swords, wind and rain would follow. The momentum was quite astonishing. Ling Ji was the exact opposite of him. His sword was already extremely narrow and thin, and his speed was also extremely fast. When he swung his sword through the air, it was as fast as lightning. Often, before his opponent could see anything, his cold sword had already been placed against his opponent's neck. The 2 of them stepped onto the ground at the top of the mountain. With a wave of their hands, their long swords were already attacking in front of them. Meng Qi only felt that she had just stepped onto the ground when Yin Xian, who had been walking in front of her, rushed up. The crescent moon in his palm flashed, and a thick fog suddenly surged in the air. The thick fog quickly spread. Not only did it hide him, but even Qin Xiaoma and Ling Ji's long swords were hidden in the fog. It was the first time the 3 of them were working together, but it was as if they had practiced it thousands of times. They had great chemistry. Meng Qi was a little dazzled. She knew that this was not because they were familiar with each other or understood each other. It was because they were indeed the strongest among the cultivators in the 3,000 worlds. They were all geniuses. With just a glance, they naturally knew how to cooperate with each other. The hand on Meng Qi's shoulder loosened, and Yin Qingyin also took a step forward. His fingers quickly streaked across the air, and specks of light gathered at his fingertips. Soon, those starlights also disappeared into the thick fog. Meng Qi took a deep breath, and her fingers moved quickly. 7 or 8 spiritual herbs and flowers flew out of her storage brocade pouch and were thrown into her 5-spirit cauldron. With a flick of her finger, a Xian spirit stone in her left hand flew out and embedded itself in the 5-spirit cauldron. Light flashed, and in an instant, a bitter medicinal fragrance came from the cauldron. She waved her hand, and a ball of dark green liquid flew out of the 5-spirit cauldron and disappeared into the thick fog. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. From the moment Meng Qi stepped on the mountaintop to the time she refined the medicine and sent it into the thick fog, it was only a matter of a few breaths. At this time, Yin Qingyin's array was still hanging above their heads. He was a true king of arrays. Even if all the cultivators in the 3 realms were combined, it would be difficult for anyone to fight with him in this aspect. Not to mention hiding 5 people. Even if there were 5,000 people, even if they stood in front of you, the other side would not notice any trace of them. They had their life-bound long swords, their life-bound talismans, and refined medicine here, but the other side of the city wall did not notice at all. When they saw the ball of dark green medicine disappear into the thick fog, the entire thick fog became green and somewhat strange. Yun Qingyan then waved her hand and retracted the array above their heads. "Ah, someone is coming up," the other side of the city wall exclaimed. Even Meng Qi, who was the weakest among them, could not help but, "They are attacking. Someone is coming up the mountain." "What is that?" "Green fog. They have medical cultivators. It's poisonous. Everyone, be careful. Be careful. They should be hiding behind the thick fog. Everyone, be careful. On guard. Prepare to activate the array. Don't panic. They have fewer people." On the city wall, it instantly became noisy. However, the people guarding the city were the elite disciples of various large sects after all, and they calmed down in a moment. The Earth Barracks had obviously discussed countermeasures. After a moment of chaos on the city wall, light immediately shone brightly. All kinds of life-bound talismans, life-bound long swords, and even the defensive array on the city wall had been activated. However, at this time, the thick green fog had already rushed up the city wall. Attack! The thick fog blocked in front of Meng Qi. She could not see the situation on the city wall clearly, but she could hear the sounds coming from the other side. Ling Ji and Qin Xiuma looked at each other and nodded at each other. The Xiuzha on the city wall saw two long swords suddenly burrow out of the thick fog and attack them with great speed. When Qin Xiuma's long sword appeared, the wind and rain instantly started. Someone immediately exclaimed, "It's Cloud Conquering Summit. It's Qin Xiuma from Cloud Conquering Summit." Immediately after, dang 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 sounds rang out. Some sword Xiu attacked with their swords and attacked Qin Xiuma. On the other side, Ling Ji's long sword was almost hidden in the air. None of the Xiuzha noticed that a narrow and thin long sword, so thin it was almost transparent, had already arrived on the city wall. Until, suddenly a Xiuzha screamed, small. His voice abruptly stopped. Ling Ji's sword was really too fast, so fast that he only reacted and shouted a warning when he felt a cold on his neck. However, before he could finish his sentence, a white light descended from the sky and enveloped him. When the white light dissipated, that Xiuzha had already disappeared from the city wall. In that instant, the city wall seemed to quiet down. The breathing of all the Xiuzha on the south city wall stopped for a moment. They knew that the Xiuzha of the Sky Barracks, especially Pei Mufeng, Qin Xiuma, and Xue Chengxian, were the strongest of their generation. They were the genius Xiuzha that their master often used to motivate them. But there were not many of these people who had actually fought with them. Even if they had fought, how could their usual sparring match with today's? They had originally thought that the Xiuzha that could enter 10 Extremes Mountain were the three most outstanding of the younger generation of the 10 great sects of the Four Jia. Even if they could not compare to Qin Xiuma and the others, they would not be too far off. And they had a lot of people. Really a lot. A fraction of the people on their side was already more than the people of the Sky Barracks. Under such an absolute advantage in numbers, and with the help of the formations in the city to defend the city, the Xiuzha of the Earth Barracks all assumed as a matter of course that the people of the Heaven Barracks would first bide their time and wait until the 48 hours were almost up before attacking them by surprise. They would take away as many people as they could. Otherwise, they probably would not even be able to defend the city at that time. But no one had expected that not long after, when they had just figured out the main formations in the city and distributed the manpower, the people of the Sky Barracks had already attacked. Not only had they attacked, they had cleanly sent away a Xiuzha from their camp the moment they attacked. This was too fast. So fast that all the Earth Barracks Xiuzha on the South City wall, who were witnessing this scene with their own eyes, felt a chill run down their backs. They had originally thought that they had an absolute advantage in numbers. But if the other side could maintain this speed of killing, wouldn't this little advantage disappear? This kind of overwhelming advantage made most people feel afraid. "This isn't the Sword of the Two from Falling Star Pavilion," someone suddenly said loudly. Pei Mufeng had been a member of the Sky Barracks from the start. Everyone had seen it with their own eyes on the grasslands at the time and had no doubts. After that, Su Zijuan had suddenly left. Everyone had discussed and guessed that he had gone to his Shixiang side and did not think much of it. But everyone had calculated that this way, the Sky Barracks had one more sword Xiao. Fortunately, no one from the Earth Barracks had left after that. At this time, Xiozha, familiar with Pei Mufeng, had already shouted. They recognized that this was not the sword of Falling Star Pavilion. Another voice quickly shouted, Qin Xiuma's sword is this one. It's also not Xiao Ran's. Xiao Ren wouldn't be so fast. Someone immediately said, these disciples from the 10 great sects, even if they were not from the same sect, would not be unfamiliar with the outstanding disciples of other sections. The only one they were unfamiliar with was probably Meng Qi. After all, he was from a small sect that most people had never heard of and was still a sectless Lu Xiao. Another scream sounded. Another Xiozha did not even react to what had happened and felt a chill on his neck. He did not even feel any pain. The white pillar of light had already landed and sent him away. The entire city wall was instantly silent like cicadas in winter. Everyone's breathing became slightly heavy. This was too scary. The 2 swords had only appeared for a short while, and 2 of them had already been sent away. What was even scarier was that the other long sword had suddenly appeared to injure people and then immediately disappeared. Until now, everyone only had time to see a silver shadow flash by. They did not even see the full appearance of the sword. But no matter what, this was not a sword that the other party knew would have. This was really too scary. Where's the formation? On the city wall, someone suddenly shouted, why hasn't the formation been activated? Following his voice, a 5-colored light suddenly lit up on the southern city wall. That light soared into the sky and directly protected everyone on the city wall. Clang, clang. Ling Ji and Qin Xiuma's long swords were forced out of the city wall. The 2 of them did not hesitate. The 2 swords instantly disappeared into the thick green fog. Heavens! The Xiozha on the city wall who had just recovered from the shock looked at this scene with wide eyes. Until now, most of them only saw a silver shadow flash by on the 5-colored light curtain that protected them. Only then did they see the location of Ling Ji's long sword. Suddenly, a Xiozha widened his eyes and looked in the direction where Ling Ji's long sword had just appeared in disbelief. Why do I feel? He opened his mouth. Even he himself felt that it was inconceivable. That Xiozha's lips trembled slightly. He completely did not notice the dozens of gazes that suddenly focused on his face. Feel what? Another Xiozha waited for a moment, but did not hear anything else. He could not help but ask. Feel. That Xiozha seemed to still feel that it was unbelievable. He opened his mouth and then opened it again. For a long time, he could not say anything. What do you feel? Say something. A female Xiozha, standing beside him, stomped her feet. She said with dissatisfaction, say it first. That sword, don't you feel that it's a little familiar? That Xiozha was so shocked that he was dumbstruck. His lips were trembling as he looked at the other female Xiozha beside him. He said, Senior sister, does it look like 7th Martial Uncle? No, it's the sect master's sword. This Xiozha was the other disciple of Broken Void sect that entered the 10 Extremes Mountain. When his voice fell, the female Xiozha beside him was stunned. 7th Martial Uncle was naturally Ling Ji, the new sect master of Broken Void sect. With one sword, even their master was defeated in the time it took to brew a cup of tea. When he was young, he once suppressed the 4 realms with one sword. He was a true genius that made it difficult for the sword Xiozha of his generation to advance. It can't be. That female Xiozha, who was called Senior Sister, was still a little calmer. She shook her head. It's impossible for the sect master to appear here. Don't forget, this is the 10 Extremes Mountain. With the protection of the formation, they were not in such a hurry. After all, the long sword that sent 2 people away was blocked by the formation of the city wall. At least in the city, they were still safe. But that Xiozha still wanted to say something, but was interrupted by his senior sister. If the sect master really came personally, then there's no need to compete. We can just admit defeat." Before she could even finish her sentence, her entire body froze. Not only her, on the entire southern city wall, almost all the shoujo were stunned. After the dense fog became greener and greener, the green-robed, male shoujo suddenly appeared. He looked like he was already 40 years old, but what the years left him was never destruction. It was a kind of settled charm that young shoujo rarely had. The current Ling Ji still looked handsome and enchanting. Moreover, he had a sword that once stunned the four realms. Many of the elders of the shoujo here were defeated by that sword. It's really... That young male shoujo from Broken Void sect lightly gritted his teeth, making a GG sound. Their seventh Shu, 3 months ago, was still the most mysterious and lazy existence in the sect. Many young disciples might have heard of the legendary stories of his youth, but those stories were too far away from them. So far away that after they entered Broken Void sect, they never saw this seventh Shu make a move again. They could not imagine how bright that long sword that stirred up the mountains and rivers of the four realms was. All they saw was seventh Shu who did not seem to care about anything. It was really hard for them to connect that powerful sword god with the lazy seventh Shu in the sect. Until that day, the disciples of the Broken Space sect that day would probably never forget that day for the rest of their lives. They could not forget the sword light that suddenly appeared in the great hall of the sect that day. They could not forget seventh Shu who walked out of the great hall with his hands behind his back as if he had turned into the sharpest long sword in the world. Naturally, they could not forget their own Shurzuin who could only follow behind seventh Shu and silently lower their heads. The two disciples on the southern city wall, coincidentally, both stayed in the sect that day. When they saw the sword that seemed to be Ling Ji, they were so scared that they could not speak. Seeing the real person appear in front of them, that young male Shio only paused for a moment before quickly putting away his life-bond long sword and bowing towards Ling Ji, sect leader. That female Shio of Broken Void sect was the same. Even if they were separated by the defensive formation of the city wall, even if they left the 10 Extremes mountain, no one would remember what happened here. But they could not forget the sword energy they saw that day at the sect. That crisscrossing sword energy could really stir up the four realms. They also believed that it was a sword that was enough to make all shoujo tremble in fear. Ling Ji's gaze lightly swept across the two Broken Void sect disciples. He waved his hand, and his sword was already out. This time, everyone saw it. The narrow and thin long sword was like a ghost, suddenly piercing towards the 5 colored light of the defensive formation. Ding, ding, ding. Concentrated sounds sounded. All the shoujo on the city wall were still immersed in the shock brought by the sudden appearance of the sect leader of Broken Void sect, Ling Ji. None of them reacted to what they should do now, until the Earth Camp shoujo, who heard the commotion and came to help, appeared on the city wall. "What are you doing?" The one who led the team to help was a spell shio. He happened to be a disciple of Mirror Moon Heaven, Yen Xian Shixiao. However, he was not under his father's sect. He looked at the dumbstruck people on the city wall, and then looked at the long sword that was openly piercing the 5 colored light screen of the formation. He was simply furious. "What are you doing? Are you possessed?" He was a disciple of the number 1 spell shio sect in the 4 realms. To be able to stand out from his peers in Mirror Moon Heaven, he was naturally not an ordinary person. Even though he could not compare to Yin Xian before he was injured, he was still a spell shio with some fame in the 3,000 realms. Sect Leader Ling. A shioja answered him. "What Sect Leader Ling?" That Mirror Moon Heaven disciple frowned. Just as he was about to scold, his gaze suddenly swept across the cloud of dark green fog. His eyes widened, and his gaze landed on the crescent moon above the thick fog. Junior Brother Yin. That Mirror Moon Heaven disciple looked at this scene in disbelief. Mirror Moon Heaven was one of the most ancient sects in the 4 realms of the 3,000 realms. Almost all the disciples in the sect used the same method to refine their life-bound magic treasures. Therefore, the life-bound magic treasures of Mirror Moon Heaven disciples were almost all moons. The life-bound magic treasures of ordinary disciples were mostly a full moon. The higher the talent, the smaller the moon. If one could walk like a crescent moon, then he was basically the most talented disciple in the sect. At this moment, above the dark green fog, the crescent moon was like a hook emitting a gentle light. That moonlight poured down like mercury, landing on the thick fog. If that cloud of fog had not already turned dark green, this scene would have been very beautiful. That Mirror Moon Heaven disciple was naturally very familiar with his junior brother. Moreover, the other 3 Mirror Moon Heaven disciples who entered the 10 Extremes Mountain this time did not have such a crescent moon as their life-bound magic treasures. No, impossible. He quickly shook his head, denying his own thoughts first. If it really was junior brother Yin Xian, he was injured so badly, and he was only in the cultivation of Lianqi. It was impossible for him to be so powerful. However, another voice in his heart said, he completed the 3rd test and joined the Heaven Barracks, standing side by side with Pei Mufeng and the others. His injuries might have already healed. Junior brother Yin? The Xiuzhi closer to that Mirror Moon Heaven disciple clearly heard his words. They all looked at that person in disbelief, asking, which junior brother Yin? Mirror Moon Heaven only had one junior brother Yin. Yin Shunbei also only had this one son. To be able to make the faces of so many Mirror Moon Heaven disciples change color, they did not even need to think to know who it was. One Ling Ji was not enough. Now, there was another Yin Xian. Those Xiuzhi were all stunned. What you all a daze for? Someone suddenly shouted, no matter who the other party is this the time for us to be in a daze? When they break through the defensive formation of the city wall, you all saw just now how terrifying his sword is. Are we going to stand here and wait for him to send us all away? That's right. Attack! Attack! We cannot sit here and wait for death. Yes, we cannot sit here and wait for death. For a moment, the city wall became noisy again. However, the Xiuzhi on the Earth Camp wall probably did not realize that they had clearly felt that they had an absolute advantage in numbers and could crush the Heaven Camp. Now, they were using "we cannot sit here and wait for death" to encourage themselves and each other. Meng Qi and the others were much more at ease. They originally did not expect Ling Ji to be able to completely intimidate all the Xiuzhi in the Earth Camp by herself. These Xiuzhi were not weak. However, it was enough to scare them and stun them for a moment. In Meng Qi's 5-ling cauldron, the medicinal liquid churned and bubbled. Soon after, she waved her hand again, and a ball of medicinal liquid entered the thick fog. The originally dark green fog instantly became a little darker. She touched with her hand, and a few more ling herbs fell into her 5-ling cauldron. This time, even Yin Xian and Qin Xiaoma were slightly shocked. How many ling herbs did Meng Qi prepare? That storage brocade bag of hers was simply like a bottomless pit, and the ling herbs inside seemed to be inexhaustible. Not to mention the Xian spirit stones that she kept flicking out. Meng Qi, how many ling herbs did you prepare? Yin Xian finally couldn't help but ask. As Meng Qi continued to refine medicine, she thought for a while. How should she describe it? Simply put, even if she refined like this for 3 days and 3 nights, the ling herbs in her storage brocade bag would be enough for her to use for a long time. One had to know that before going to the Starfall Sea, she had already bought a large batch of ling herbs. After leaving the Starfall Sea, she replenished a large batch again. Meng Qi now used Xian spirit stones to buy herbs. As long as it was not that kind of natural treasure, 1 Xian spirit stone could buy too many ordinary ling herbs. About 200 Xian spirit stones worth of ling herbs. Meng Qi thought for a while and said, Even the young master of Mirror Moon Heaven was shocked by this number. Of course, he had seen so many Xian spirit stones before. Mirror Moon Heaven was the #1 cultivation sect in the 3,000 worlds. Azu, but Meng Qi was only a nascent soul cultivator, and she carried 200 Xian spirit stones worth of ling herbs with her. This was too and about 200 Xian spirit stones worth of Ling flowers and fruits. Meng Qi didn't finish speaking. 200 Xian spirit stones worth of exotic beast herbs. Meng Qi continued. Exotic beast herbs naturally refer to the parts of exotic beasts that could be used as herbs. Yan Xian, Qin Xiuma. This time, even Ling Ji who heard it. They were all from large sects and weren't medical cultivators. If Shueqing Xian was here, he would probably be stunned. Even he wouldn't carry so many Ling herbs with him. It wasn't a problem of whether or not they could hold them. The more expensive storage brocade bags used by cultivators could hold a lot of things. They really didn't have that many spirit stones. Shueqing Xian was the strongest disciple in the younger generation of the number 1 medical cultivator sect in the world. He only brought 100 Xian spirit stones with him when he came to the 10 Extremes mountain this time. His father prepared a brocade bag for him and his sister. Inside were some commonly used spiritual herbs and some rare spiritual herbs. In total, it didn't exceed 10 Xian spirit stones. Meng Qi was a nascent soul cultivator, and she had so many Xian spirit stones at such a young age. These people felt that it was inconceivable. Qin Xiuma had been with her for a long time. He knew that Meng Qi should be very rich, but he didn't expect her to have so many Xian spirit stones. This time, even Meng Qi's side was silent for a moment. Ling Ji's long sword was still stabbing the defensive light screen of the city wall, and Qin Xiuma's long sword had already flown over to help. They can't do anything to this defensive barrier in a short time. The cultivators on the city wall watched for a while and immediately cheered. So what if Ling Ji's long sword was powerful? He was only a perfect dividing soul cultivator right now. Even though he could send away 2 cultivators in a flash, he still couldn't break the defensive formation on the city wall that was activated by 4 cultivators working together. The cultivators of the Earth Barracks were slightly relieved. Even Ling Ji couldn't do anything. The others definitely couldn't do anything. They reinvigorated themselves. Their life-bound long swords and life-bound talismans were lined up on the city wall. It was quite a spectacular sight. Yin Shidi, that Jingyue Sky disciple called out, "You should leave first. In another 40 hours, it will be your turn to defend. At that time, you should have a bit of an advantage." No one responded to him. Yin Xian acted as if he didn't hear it at all. "It's done," Yin Qingyin said. "Oh." Meng Qi nodded. She had just sent the last ball of green liquid into the thick fog. Even though the cultivators of the 3,000 worlds have all kinds of schools: sword cultivation, spell cultivation, medical cultivation, formation cultivation, Yun Qingyin said, but in the end, they all rely on spiritual energy. As he spoke, he opened his palm. There was a small spirit stone lying quietly on it. Even though the spirit stone was small, it was shining brightly. It looked crystal clear and very beautiful. Yin Xian and the others' gazes were attracted over. They inadvertently glanced at it. Then they were all stunned. This was a heaven spirit stone, heaven, earth, and Xian level 3 spirit stone. 1,000 Xian spirit stones could only be exchanged for 1 earth spirit stone. 1,000 earth spirit stones could only be exchanged for 1 heaven spirit stone. Even these cultivators who came from large sects rarely saw something like a heaven spirit stone. A single sky spirit stone like this was almost equivalent to the entire wealth of many sections. And they looked at Yin Qingyin and then at Meng Qi. Were these two in class? Previously, Yin Qingyin had said that he had personally taught Meng Qi. But at that time, no one had thought about how he had taught him. Until just now, when they heard that Yin Qingyin had clearly seen through the defensive array on the city wall with just a glance, and had even analyzed it from Meng Qi. Qin Xiuma, Yin Xian, and the others didn't cultivate arrays, so they couldn't understand what Yin Qingyin had said. Meng Qi, however, listened with great interest. He nodded from time to time and would even ask a few questions. Just like this, one spoke and one listened. Then, Meng Qi began to refine medicine. Yin Qingyin motioned for everyone to slow down their attacks. They didn't need to break the defensive array on the city wall first and let Meng Qi try. Qin Xiuma naturally didn't object. Ling Ji also couldn't object. Yin Xian was a little curious, but he also wouldn't object. They had also seen and heard the words and movements of the Earth Camp Xiozha on the city wall. Those Xiozha on the city wall didn't know. They thought that the array could stop Ling Ji and the others. It was just that they had stopped and waited for Meng Qi to act. Also, from beginning to end, the king of the array hadn't acted at all. This defensive array on the city wall needs 4 people to activate. Yin Xingyan continued. Ling energy is endless and naturally is connected to the array and can't be severed. Poison can not only attack Xiozha through the blood, flesh, and channels, but also through Ling energy. I understand. Meng Qi nodded obediently and immediately asked, what if they don't use Xiozha to activate the array, but use Ling stones? Oh, Yin Xingyan nodded and praised. This is a good question. If that's the case, then it will be more difficult. They won't, Qin Xiaoma suddenly said. Yes, they won't use Ling stones to activate such a large-scale array, Yin Xin quickly said. Meng Qi looked at the two and stilled. Such a large-scale array needs 4 Fenshun Xiozha to continuously pour in Ling energy to activate. If it's exchanged for Ling stones, it needs 4 Xian Ling stones, and it won't last long, Ling Ji said. Broken Void Sect was skilled in sword arrays. Other than Yin Xingyan, he was the only one in the group that knew a bit about arrays. Yes. Yin Xian nodded. That's Xian Ling stones, he said. Meng Qi looked at Yin Xian and nodded. So that's how it is. She had a lot of Ling stones now, but she still remembered the time when she couldn't even afford a stalk of jackdaw grass that was worth 28th grade Ling stones. So they definitely rely on Xiozha and not Ling stones. Otherwise, they would have spent more than a dozen Xian Ling stones in this short while. Right? Yin Xian said. All right. Meng Qi nodded. She had no more doubts and waved her hand. The 5-spirit cauldron made a muffled sound and disappeared into the dark green fog. Let's do it. Meng Qi nodded at Yin Xian. Although a new moon hung above the dark green fog, it had stayed in place for too long. It hadn't moved since it had appeared. The Xiozha on the city wall would pay attention to the fog at first, but then they gradually turned their attention away. However, the color of the fog was really too dark. When it moved, everyone immediately noticed it. It moved. The fog moved. What is it doing? Could it be that Yin Xian has a way to break the array that even Ling Ji couldn't? Don't you think the color looks a bit strange? Will there be any problems? Are the spells of your mirror moon sky always like this? Those Xiozha carefully paid attention to Ling Ji and Qin Xiaoma's longswords while also paying attention to the dark green fog. Ha ha ha, look! Suddenly, a Xiozha pointed in front of him and shouted. Everyone looked over and saw that the green fog was lying limply on the light screen of the formation. It was completely blocked outside. It couldn't do anything to the light screen of the array. Many Xiozha thought silently. Chapter 159. The current situation did seem a bit ridiculous. When the fog had just appeared, the cultivators of the Earth Camp in the city had been paying attention to it. A crescent moon hung high in the sky, and the green fog became thicker and thicker, looking very strange. Especially when the Mirror Moon Heaven Disciple appeared later and said that the crescent moon was the soul-bound talisman of Yin Xian, who should have been injured. It made everyone more vigilant. No matter how down and out Yin Xian was after being injured, his reputation as a genius was real. He gradually rose to fame from sparring with his peers and became the undisputed #1 among the young cultivators in the 3,000 worlds. But now, looking at the green fog that was blocked outside the city by the barrier light screen, looking at the fog that was lying softly on the light screen as if it was acting coquettishly, many people couldn't help but laugh. Even the tense atmosphere from before seemed to have lightened a bit. Some Earth Camp cultivators even looked at Meng Qi, who was standing in the same place after the fog flew away, and even smiled at her, waving their hands as a greeting. Although it was a great battle of 10 Extremes Mountain, for everyone, at least now, there was no cruel and heartless feeling of a life and death battle. Meng Qi's expression didn't change. and she focused on the fog. Her five-spirit cauldron was inside, and a soul-bound talisman could communicate with its master's mind. With her current medical skills, although she couldn't precisely control every bit of poison that was sent into the fog, but through the five-spirit cauldron, she could still sense the minute changes in the defensive formation. You could draw formations on the ground. Yin Qingyan suddenly said, "You can only use formations in the fog. DDXS. Calm, HM." Meng Qi stilled and suddenly reacted. "You mean, try it?" Yin Qingyan nodded at her. "Okay." Meng Qi didn't hesitate anymore. She took a deep breath, and her consciousness was withdrawn. She and the five-spirit cauldron were inextricably linked, and a soul-bound talisman would naturally listen to its master's orders. But she never thought that it could be done like this. Now that Meng Qi's divine sense was restrained, she simply closed her eyes, and the five-spirit cauldron seemed to be right in front of her. She could feel all the movements of the five-spirit cauldron and knew the existence of the thick fog. Even the poison that she had sent into the thick fog earlier appeared incomparably clear. Buzz! Meng Qi's five-spirit cauldron suddenly moved. The dark green fog was torn apart, and wherever the five-spirit cauldron passed, it left behind a trail. Meng Qi moved so fast that Qin Xiaoma and Yin Xian, who were standing beside her, could only watch as the thick fog seemed to be cut apart by a complete array in an instant. The pattern looked a little strange, but it was so strict and beautiful. What are they doing? I don't know. It feels a little weird. Ha! Ha ha ha. Is it because you can't break in, so you're just drawing for fun? Someone said half-jokingly. However, no one laughed at his joke. There was not even a single unnecessary laughter on the city wall. Instead, the moment that person's voice fell, it became incomparably quiet. In everyone's eyes, the thick fog that was still lying softly outside the defensive array of the city wall, as if it was acting coquettishly, had completely changed its appearance at this moment. The green fog started to burn as if it would turn into a ball of flames at any time and swallow the light screen released by the defensive array. So he chose departing fire. Yin Qingyan nodded slightly. He raised his hand, and 7 or 8 sparkling and translucent spirit stones that emitted dazzling ling light flew out from his palm and flew towards the array. Earth spirit stones! This time, the cultivators inside and outside the city exclaimed in unison, especially the earth spirit stones. Especially those earth barracks Xiozha. It wasn't like they didn't notice the white-robed male standing beside Meng Qi. However, everyone's attention was attracted by Ling Ji, who suddenly appeared in 10 Extremes Mountain, and Yin Xian, who seemed to have become stronger again. Secondly, the cultivators here had never truly seen Yin Qingyan. They simply did not expect that other than Ling Ji, the Earth Spirit Stones could actually find such a powerful helper. Although Yin Qingyan did not directly attack them, it was still Earth Spirit Stones. If it was Xian Spirit Stones, the Earth Barracks Xiozha wouldn't be so surprised. It wasn't like they couldn't take it out. Before coming to the 10 Extremes Mountain, the sect had prepared some Xian Spirit Stones for everyone to bring with them in case of emergency. However, this was Earth Spirit Stones. The value of 1 Earth Spirit Stone. Even if the cultivators who could reach here were almost all from the 10 great sects, they did not know how to measure it. Because in the sect, everyone usually used Xian Spirit Stones as the standard to measure the value of a treasure or treasure. It was enough to show that the item was incomparably precious. Occasionally, there would be people who heard the elders in the sect mention how many Earth Spirit Stones an item would be sold for in the sky beyond Heaven's Sky Auction House. However, that was still a little far from them. Furthermore, an item with such a price would definitely be helpful to the entire sect's inheritance. Now, on the city wall, the Earth Spirit Stones cultivators could only stare blankly at this scene, their emotions fluctuating. In the blink of an eye, those Earth Spirit Stones had already flown above the thick fog, directly scattering and embedding themselves into the thick fog. They actually forgot that they were on the city's defense side. What they should do now was to immediately stop Meng Qi and the others' actions. Some people even faintly anticipated in the depths of their hearts, wanted to see how this item that required Earth Spirit Stones would look like. Actually, it was not just them. Even Ling Ji, Yin Xian, and the others outside the city wall were somewhat shocked. Especially Ling Ji. He turned back and glanced at Yin Qingyan. Unlike the Earth Spirit Stones cultivators who were further away, he completely heard the conversation between Meng Qi and Yin Qingyan. This guy was really teaching Meng Qi. Ling Ji quickly came to a conclusion. Furthermore, their actions seemed to be very natural. One taught, one learned. The trust and tacit understanding between them made others unable to interfere at all. Ling Ji thought silently. Meng Qi's trust in this Yin Qingyan was definitely above his trust in himself. He looked strangely at Yin Qingyan and then looked at the ball of thick fog. Earth Spirit Stones, it wasn't that he couldn't take them out. As a sword show elder who had been famous for a long time, and a sect leader of Broken Space Sect, he had Earth Spirit Stones. But to casually throw out 7 or 8 Earth Spirit Stones like this, even he would hesitate. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. Just as everyone was dazed, outside the light screen of the defensive formation on the city wall, the ball of thick fog boiled even more violently. It was no longer a ball of thick fog now. After those Earth Spirit Stones were embedded, the Ling energy that gushed out of the stones seemed to cause the entire thick fog to boil. Green flames shot into the sky, burning fiercely. The tongues of fire swept towards the light screen formed by the defensive formation. Quick! On the city wall, the Earth Spirit Stones cultivators instantly recovered. Quick, stop her! In an instant, 4 or 5 life-bond longswords whistled as they flew towards that direction. At the same time, 3 or 4 techniques landed behind that thick fog. Want to stop it? Yin Qingyan laughed softly. It's too late. His tone was certain, his gaze bright. He stood calmly beside Meng Qi and looked at the Earth Spirit Stones cultivators on the city wall. Clearly, the Earth Spirit Stones cultivators were on the city wall, and he was the one below the city wall. But when those cultivators met Yin Qingyan's gaze, they actually felt as though they were being looked down upon by this man. Inside the city, near the southern city wall, a few muffled groans mixed with screams suddenly sounded. Following those muffled groans, the light screen of the formation that was originally protecting everyone outside the city wall slowly dimmed. What happened? What happened? What happened? This is the Earth Spirit Stones cultivators quickly realized that something was wrong. At this time, a cultivator suddenly leaped onto the city wall and shouted, "Where are the medical cultivators? They're poisoned. Come over, 3 medical cultivators." This person had stayed beside the defensive formation on the city wall to protect the cultivators that were continuously injecting Ling energy into the defensive formation. What happened? Someone immediately asked. I don't know. They were suddenly poisoned. Where are the medical cultivators? Come with me to see them first. The medical cultivators on the city wall immediately followed that cultivator towards the formation. The remaining cultivators were slightly shocked and uncertain. They looked at each other, and then looked at Meng Qi outside the city. In the end, everyone's gaze landed on that ball of green fog. Now that the defensive formation was no longer obstructing them, the entire city wall was exposed in front of Meng Qi and the others. The Earth Spirit Stones cultivators had originally been curious as to how their companions were poisoned. At this time, when they looked at Ling Ji and the others outside the city, their expressions suddenly changed. Not good. Someone suddenly exclaimed. They had been too careless. They shouldn't have let the majority of their attention be drawn by a ball of strange green fog. Right now, the ones outside the city were Ling Ji, Yin Xian. Even Qin Xiaoma was an outstanding figure among his peers. They weren't people they could easily deal with. They had been too careless. Because there was the help of the defensive formation, this little city was easy to defend and hard to attack, and they had more than 10 times the number of people on their side. From the beginning, they had been certain that their side would win. Many of the Xiozha on the city wall, even though they were standing here to defend the city, had never thought that the other side would have a way to attack the city. Even though Ling Ji had the upper hand and sent away 2 of them with 1 move. But after the defensive formation was activated, Even he couldn't do anything, so everyone felt it wasn't a big deal. But now, the defensive formation was suddenly gone. Outside the city, there were Ling Ji, Yan Xian, and Qin Xiaoma who were watching covetously. There was also a white-clothed male who, other than throwing out a few earthling stones, hadn't made a move. Some of the Earth Spirit Stone Camp Xiozha who reacted quickly waved their hands. Their soul-tethered talismans or long swords instantly floated beside them. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The sounds didn't stop. They might not be as good as Yan Xian and the others, but they were outstanding among their peers, and their reactions were extremely fast. Since the defensive formation was gone, they could still defend the city. Whoosh! That ball of green mist still hadn't disappeared. Without the defensive formation, the green flames instantly became even more rampant and swept towards the Xiozha on the city wall. With the help of those earthling stones, Meng Qi raised her hand. Thick mist flew out of her 5-ling cauldron and floated side by side with the crescent moon above the thick mist. Inside the 5-ling cauldron, a few green ling herbs turned into medicinal liquid and quickly boiled. The mist slowly rose from inside and connected with the green flames below. Faintly, it seemed to have the presence of covering the sky and the sun. Yan Xian turned his head to look at Meng Qi. He raised his hand, and a gust of wind blew past, causing his sleeves to flutter. That crescent moon suddenly flashed a few times, disappeared, and then reappeared. If one hadn't been looking at the crescent moon, they wouldn't have noticed the small changes of the crescent moon. After the third flash, the crescent moon was even brighter than before. The green mist that covered the sky had already covered the crescent moon, but the silver moonlight poured down at this time and seemed to put a veil over the green mist. At the same time, Ling Ji's lips curled slightly. The tip of her life-bond long sword suddenly tilted and turned into a bolt of lightning as she charged into the city. Qin Xiaoma's gaze became even deeper. His finger tapped lightly, and a patch of dark green light rippled between his fingers that wrapped around his long sword. That patch of green light, with his life-bond long sword as the center, suddenly spread out and turned into a net. The green net floated above the long sword and looked slightly eerie. This was a characteristic of the cloud-treading peak. They cultivated both sword and art. When a long sword moved, it would be accompanied by spells. Qin Xiaoma's finger flicked, and the long sword suddenly charged towards the city wall. The Xiozha on the city wall had originally been very sure that Meng Qi and the others were few in number and could not attack. In the blink of an eye, the advantage seemed to have reversed. The green flame was still burning furiously above the city wall, the 5-ling cauldron hanging high above. Meng Qi's expression looked very serious. The life-bond talisman was connected to her mind. She could clearly feel the direction of each thread of green mist. The defensive formation on the city wall was activated by the cooperation of 4 Xiozha. At this time, the 4 people were standing at the 4 corners of the formation, their expressions grave as Ling energy continuously poured into the formation. On the ground beside them, there were 4 Xiozha sitting cross-legged. These were the other 4 Xiozha who had used up all their Ling energy and were resting. After the Earth camp entered the city, they had calculated carefully. 8 Xiozha of similar cultivation would be enough to support the continuous operation of this defensive formation. These 4 had just replaced the previous 4. They could also see the hubbub on the city wall from where they were. However, no one was too worried. No matter how strong the people on the other side were, they had more people. They were all elite disciples of the 10 great sections. Even if they could not compare to the top geniuses, they were not far behind. They had almost 20 times the number of people on the other side, and the difference in strength was not that great. What's more, they were defending the city with the help of so many formations in the city. Therefore, they believed that as long as there were not too many mistakes, there was basically no problem in defending the city. The 4 people's expressions were serious, but their hearts were still calm. Ling energy continuously poured into the formation. The few people sitting cross-legged on the ground resting were also very calm. They had no intention of going to the city wall to help. They only focused on recovering their Ling energy. Compared to the hubbub on the city wall, the surroundings of the formation near the city wall were so quiet that there was not a trace of nervousness that a great battle had already begun. Ugh! Just at this time, a Xiozha who was pouring Ling energy into the formation suddenly groaned. The four people sitting cross-legged on the ground all looked at him. They saw that the Xiozha, who was also at the perfect level of the spirit-severing stage, suddenly clutched his chest and fell backwards. Fellow Taoist, one of the people sitting on the ground, quickly jumped up and rushed over to support that person. It shouldn't be. He had some doubts in his heart. The 8 of them had similar cultivation. These 4 had just replaced the 4 of them not long ago. Logically speaking, their Ling energy should not be exhausted so quickly. Although that was what he thought, that person still quickly caught the Xiozha, who fell down with a groan. He prepared to take over that person's place and continue to pour his Ling energy into the formation. Ugh, who knew that just at this time, another groan sounded. Another Xiozha suddenly fell backwards. Immediately after, without giving anyone time to react, one of the remaining 2 Xiozha clutched his chest. The other even screamed out and fell to the ground together. Poison. The Xiozha who screamed out even fell to the ground with a bang. He clutched his chest with one hand and raised the other hand. He pointed at the formation with trembling fingers. There's poison? Poison! The 4 Xiozha who were recovering their Ling energy were stunned. The formation is poisonous? They could not understand what this meant, but they could see that the lips of the 4 people had turned pitch black. It was obvious that they were poisoned. Let's ask for help first. One of the Xiozha was also decisive. With a flick of his finger, a small spiritual energy firework flew up. This was the signal they had agreed on from the beginning. This city was not big. The Xiozha of the Earth Barracks were scattered all over the city. If a place could not hold on, they would use this kind of spiritual energy firework to send a message. The 4 people released the spiritual energy firework as they laid the 4 poisoned Xiozha on the ground. At this time, the battle on the southern city wall was fierce. The few people did not dare to delay and quickly took over the positions of the 4 people. They planned to also maintain the defensive formation on the city wall. Don't! The person lying on the ground suddenly raised his upper body. The formation, he panted and repeatedly stopped them. That formation is poisonous. The 4 people were stunned. They did not need to guess what was going on. The 4 people's Ling energy was not enough to begin with. The moment they sent their Ling energy into the formation, an extremely cold presence suddenly rushed along their meridians to their spiritual seas. That presence came from the formation and instantly froze their spiritual seas. Before the voice of doubt disappeared, it turned into a scream. The 4 people suddenly fell backwards. Like the previous 4 Xiozha, they fell to the ground. Their lips also turned black. One of them was a medical Xiao. He barely managed to raise his upper body. Trembling, he reached towards his storage brocade pouch, wanting to take out a Dan that could cure the poison. At the same time, on the southern city wall, Ling Ji and Qin Xiuma's 2 long swords had already attacked. The Xiozha of the Earth Barracks on the city wall were a little nervous, but they were not afraid as a whole. No matter how powerful Ling Ji and Qin Xiuma's long swords were, they were still just Funshin Xiozha. It had to be known that the defensive formation on the city wall was activated by 4 Funshin Xiozha. It was enough to block the attacks of 2 people. In comparison, it was the flame-like green mist under the moonlight of the crescent moon that made them a little nervous. The crescent moon was Yin Xian. Everyone had seen the green mist released by the Earth Spirit Stone with their own eyes. They looked nervously at Meng Qi and then at Yin Qingyan. The Sword Xiu's life bond long swords were already floating beside them. The tips of the sword were pointed at Meng Qi, ready to attack at any time. The Magic Xiu's life bond talismans were already in action. They flickered with a faint light, as though in the next moment there would be earth-shattering spells attacking Meng Qi's group. They hadn't attacked yet because the defensive formation was still there. They were accumulating power. When they attacked, they would give the Shioja of the Heaven Barracks a powerful wave of attacks. Just at this time, a spiritual energy firework flashed in the air. It flashed 3 times in a row, and then exploded and disappeared. "It's from the formation," someone immediately said. "What's going on over there? Someone sneak attack? They seem to only have 5 people. Where are the other 4? The Shioja on the city wall had noticed that there were only 5 people on Meng Qi's side. However, they had been shocked by Ling Ji's sudden appearance. Later, it was Yin Xian's life bond talisman that attracted everyone's attention. At this time, everyone finally reacted. Meng Qi's group only had 5 people attacking the city. There were still 4 people who hadn't shown up yet. Among these 4 people, there was also the pavilion master of Falling Star Pavilion. He was the leader of the younger generation of Sword Xiao. He was definitely a strong person that couldn't be ignored. Pei Mufeng. "All right." Meng Qi raised his hand lightly. The 5-spirit cauldron spun in the air. She exhaled. The Ling ocean in her body had almost become empty. However, defensive formation. Someone on the city wall suddenly shouted. The defensive formation has disappeared. Yin Xian's crescent moon flashed again. The moonlight became even brighter and shone down on the city wall. Just at this time, outside the city wall, Ling Ji and Qin Xiuma's long swords that had been waiting for a long time suddenly turned into 2 cold lights and charged into the city wall like cheetahs that finally found their prey. Chapter 160. On the city wall, the Shioja of the Earth Camp were instantly caught off guard. However, they were not weak. They came from the top 10 sects of each jia. Even though the strongest was only a Fengshen, they were already the best among the young disciples of the 4 jia. However, Ling Ji and Qin Xiuma's swords were too fast, especially Ling Ji. His long sword was narrow and thin, the blade almost transparent, adding on the fact that it was in the hands of the current sect leader of Broken Space Sect. When the longsword came close, the cold air and sword energy would attack before the Shioja of the Earth Camp could react. Very quickly, multiple screams sounded on the city wall. White light covered the 3 people and sent them away. However, in this short moment, the Shioja of the Earth Camp calmed down. "Don't panic," someone said loudly. "They have fewer people. We need to hold our ground. 2 teams go. There's an attack at the formation on the city wall." Another person said loudly, "The rest of the people, follow me." The Shioja of the Earth Camp had discussed before. If the other side really attacked the city, what should they do? At this time, those people immediately moved. About 10 Shioja turned and jumped off the city wall, charging towards the defensive formation on the city wall. The rest of the Earth Camp Shioja took out their long swords and talismans. Sword light and spell light shone brightly as they attacked Meng Qi and the others below the city wall. "Ha!" Ling Ji laughed lightly. The 4 or 5 long swords of the Earth Camp Shioja headed straight for his Earth Camp Lifebond longsword. Even if he was also a Fengshen like them, he was not afraid at all. His Lifebond longsword was like a slippery and nimble fish, easily passing through the multiple long swords and intercepting them. Another scream came from the city wall. White light descended and sent away an Earth Camp Shioja. On the city wall, the Earth Camp Shioja looked at the new sect leader of Broken Space sect with more fear in their eyes. Too fast. It was too sharp. Many of them only knew the power of Broken Space sect's sword formation. They had also heard the elders of the sect mention the name of this genius Sword Xiao that once shocked his peers. However, they had never truly seen Ling Ji fight. He had never thought that there would be such a swift and sharp sword in the world. The hesitant and uncertain gazes of the Earth Barracks disciples made Ling Ji turn her head to look at Meng Qi somewhat disappointedly. Then his face darkened. The green-clothed female cultivator didn't look at him at all. Meng Qi was staring intently at his own 5-spirit cauldron while tilting his head to listen to 4 Yun Qinyan beside her. "Oomph." Ling Ji snorted lightly. His intrinsic long sword suddenly swept across. Just a moment ago, it was as swift as a ghost, and its tracks were hard to find. In the blink of an eye, it was as if it had turned into a mighty river, sweeping past the city wall. Oh! Amidst the exclamations, the Earth Camp Shioja dodged as they tried to seize the opportunity to counterattack. However, there was still a sword on the city wall. Not only was there a sword, there was also a crescent moon hanging high in the sky. There were also silver needles with a faint medicinal aura that pierced through the silver moonlight. Other than Yin Xinyan, who was standing beside Meng Qi, the other members of the Heaven Barracks had all attacked. They were the most outstanding disciples of their respective sections. Even though this was the first time they had worked together, they seemed to have a tacit understanding as though they had worked together many times before. The Earth Camp Shioja might seem to have more people, but they were all fighting for themselves and were at a disadvantage. Just at this time, a loud clang suddenly sounded from inside the city. It seemed to be the sound of a bell from the distant past. That bell sound was melodious and grand, carrying a distant and ancient presence as it spread in all directions. Yin Xinyan and Ling Ji's expressions changed slightly at the same time, becoming slightly grave. "It's actually here," he murmured. Yin Xinyan's voice wasn't loud, and they were in the middle of a fierce battle. Other than Meng Qi, who had been standing beside him the entire time, no one else heard. Meng Qi reflexively asked. "Thousand Emperor Bell." The one who answered her wasn't Yin Xinyan, but Ling Ji, who suddenly retreated and landed beside the two. Meng Qi was slightly startled and repeated in a low voice, "Thousand Emperor Bell?" This was something she had never heard of before, something unfamiliar. "Yes." Yin Xinyan nodded slightly and said, "Legend has it that in ancient times, the first master craftsman failed to pass the tribulation. Before he died, he sacrificed his entire body to forge a supreme talisman." Ling Ji glanced at Yin Xinyan, as if competing with him, and said, "After the master craftsman died, no one else was able to ring the Thousand Emperor Bell. There has always been a legend in the 3,000 worlds that the Thousand Emperor Bell was not only the master craftsman's painstaking work, but also the condensation of his great resentment from his failure to pass the tribulation. The day the Thousand Emperor Bell rings again, the flames of war in the three realms will reignite, and the world will become a purgatory." He seemed to have sensed something, and sword light and sorcery interweaved on the city wall. Weren't the people who were fighting now the most outstanding disciples of the 3,000 worlds younger generation? Although once they left this place, no one would remember that they had given birth to them. But Meng Qi followed Ling Ji's gaze. On the city wall, the expressions of many Earth Barracks cultivators had already become somewhat ferocious. Their eyes were bloodshot, and their attacks were becoming more and more merciless, more and more ruthless. Right at this moment, another gong sound was heard. That sound leisurely reverberated in the sky above the small city at the peak of the mountain, and when it entered the ears, it was ethereal and ethereal. But under the sound of the bell, even Meng Qi's heart was ignited with a bit of bloodthirsty impulse. Countless images flashed through Meng Qi's mind. In an instant, the karma of her past life and present life reincarnated, and many images that she had originally thrown to the back of her mind rushed to the front of her mind. She had clearly saved people, but no one listened to her explanation and locked her up in the dungeon. She had clearly done nothing wrong, but was scolded as a demoness, and said that she raised Yao beasts to harm people. She had clearly misunderstood, wronged, condescending and disdainful gazes, coldness, distrust, suspicion. Like bewitching spirits, they furiously flooded into her mind. Meng Qi felt that there was an unfamiliar feeling in her heart. Something violent was growing and burning. Her eyes had unknowingly turned blood red. "Kill! Kill them all!" A voice slowly sounded in her mind. "Don't forget they all wronged you. Kill. Kill them all. That's right. Kill, kill, kill. Kill those who wronged you." Meng Qi instinctively waved her fingers. The green mist in the five-ling cauldron rose into the air and attacked those Earth Barracks Shioja. Not far from her, Yin Xian's eyes had also become bloodshot. Two crescent moons floated in his eyes. The crescent moons were like hooks, but they were covered by a patch of blood and dyed with blood. "Kill! He murmured, his voice indifferent. Kill them all. Beside the two, Xue Chengxian and Qin Xiaoma had also become completely red. The more they attacked, the more unrestrained and vicious they became. It was as though the city wall in front of them was an enemy that they could not live under the same sky with. Ah, ah, ah. Amidst the wails from the city wall, Xue Chengxian suddenly stumbled. He grunted, his eyes still red as he stared viciously at the city wall. One of his hands unconsciously covered his abdomen, his entire body stumbling backwards. Blood seeped out between his fingers. Xue Chengxian seemed to have completely forgotten that he was a medical xiao. He did not stop the bleeding and heal his wounds. He was still furiously controlling his life-bound silver needles to attack the Earth Barracks Xiozha. By Chu Pavilion kill, Xue Chengxian gritted his teeth as he murmured. Only Yun Qingyin and Ling Ji still had their life-bound silver needles. The two's eyes were slightly red, but they could still stand firmly at their original spots. They exchanged a look. Ling Ji sighed lightly and walked towards Xue Chengxian, who was already swaying, but still focused on attacking. At this time, Meng Qi suddenly moved. Her eyes were still bloodshot, as though they had no focus. But the green-clothed female suddenly stopped caring about her life-bound cauldron. She abruptly turned and ran towards Xue Chengxian. Chapter 161. Ling Ji was stunned. Her footsteps subconsciously stopped. In the blink of an eye, Meng Qi had already rushed to Xue Chengxuan's side. Her eyes were blood-red. Almost no one could see the original color of her eyes. Her gaze was cold and desolate. A few strands of black hair hung down by her cheeks. The mountain wind lifted her hair and brushed her slightly pale cheeks. Meng Qi was not a stunning beauty, but she usually liked to wear green clothes. Her body always carried a faint medicinal fragrance. Her entire person was elegant like bamboo, very comfortable. Right now, her lips and eyes were the same, but there was an indescribable, strange coldness to her. At this moment, there was another long dang sound. The faintly discernible sound of the bell came from afar again. The sound of the bell was clearly ethereal, very pleasing to the ear. But the sound of fighting on the city wall, accompanied by the lingering sound of the bell, became more and more ferocious. The cultivators who were just barely able to maintain their calm and restrained a little now had bloodshot eyes. On the city wall, countless techniques and sword lights were flying. The smell of blood in the air was getting thicker and thicker. In the beginning, the cultivators seemed to still remember why they came here, and also vaguely remembered which camp they belonged to. A moment later, those cultivators whose eyes were completely covered by the color of blood no longer held back the radiance of their swords and spells. In the air above the city wall, sword lights flashed, and all kinds of techniques rampaged. From time to time, screams could be heard, and the smell of blood began to fill the air. Accompanied by a muffled bang and a long scream, a tall cultivator wearing a black robe fell down from the city wall. 2K novel then, in this kind of bloody storm, Meng Qi, dressed in green clothes, lightly and nimbly landed beside Xue Chengxian. Xue Chengxian, whose eyes had already turned red from the killing, covered his lower abdomen with one hand. The index and middle fingers of his other hand were pressed together. He was originally a medical cultivator, and his life-bound magic artifact, the Silver Needle, was originally a sharp weapon that could save people. But now, on the gleaming silver needle, several drops of blood slid down the body of the needle, as if it was dyed red, just like its owner's crimson eyes. Meng Qi placed his hand on the back of Xue Chengxuan's hand. Ugh! The young medical practitioner let out a muffled groan as blood seeped out from between his fingers. He didn't lower his head. His crimson-red eyes were still looking at the top of the city wall. It was as if his heart and eyes were filled with silver needles that had already turned into killing weapons. Meng Qi raised his hand and held a small medicine knife horizontally in his right hand. There were some simple fine lines drawn on the medicine knife. Although the lines were simple, They were filled with an ancient aura, adding a desolate aura to the medicine knife. Ling Ji's gaze fell on the medicine knife, and she was slightly stunned. Could this be? He subconsciously turned his head to look at Yin Qinyan. The white-robed woman stood there, and a trace of nostalgia flashed past her eyes. You gave this to her? Ling Ji asked. Ugh. Yin Qinyan answered vaguely. She looked at Ling Ji with a smile that wasn't a smile. The two of them looked at each other. They couldn't see the answer they wanted to know from each other's faces. I didn't expect the 1,000 Emperor's Bell to be here. Ling Ji didn't ask any more questions. He looked at Meng Qi again. He didn't know what the green-robed woman was thinking, but the medicine knife in her hand was already pressed against Xue Qingxuan's wound on his lower abdomen. She gently raised her hand and pushed away the other party's hand that was covering the wound. The medicine knife quickly slid across the injured area. Ding! With a crisp sound, Meng Qi threw a small piece of the broken sword blade on the ground. She waved her hand. The life cauldron understood its master's thoughts more and more now. It gently swayed and returned to her side. Meng Qi had already put away the medicine knife. His left hand held a piece of cloth and pressed it against Xue Qingxuan's wound. His right hand quickly took out various spiritual herbs and spiritual flowers from his storage bag and threw them into the life cauldron. A few spiritual stones popped out and firmly embedded themselves in the array below the life cauldron's belly. The array lit up and the 5-spirit cauldron started to spin in the air. After a while, a medicinal fragrance filled the air. The life cauldron stopped spinning. The body of the cauldron shook and a small ball of green ointment fell into Meng Qi's palm. Ugh! Xue Chengxian grunted again. Meng Qi pressed the ointment onto his wound. Xue Qingxuan's robe had already been cut off by her medical knife. Right now, Xue Chengxian, who was standing not far away, could clearly see that Xue Qingxuan's hideous wound was healing at a speed visible to the naked eye after she applied the small lump of ointment on it. Tisk! Ling Ji couldn't help but sigh. The 1,000 Emperor Bell can awaken the deepest desire in a person's heart. He seemed to be talking to himself, but also seemed to be talking to Yin Qinyan. Little Qi likes, could it be the Xue family, HM? Before Ling Ji finished speaking, Meng Qi had already jumped up. The city walls were already in chaos. 2 Xiuzhe wearing Jingyue Sky's long robes jumped down the city walls and charged towards Yin Xian. A bloody light flashed through the eyes of this Jingyue Sky's young sect master. In front of him, his crescent-shaped life bond talisman was floating high in the air, but it was already dyed red. Under the blood moon, mist filled the air. There was also a crescent moon above the heads of the 2 Jingyue Sky Xiuzhe. But in Jingyue Sky, the more powerful a life bond talisman was, the more it looked like a crescent moon. Their life bond talismans were only slightly more curved than a half moon and were still far from a crescent moon. Their life bond talismans also had a thick mist coming out and spreading out. Jingyue Sky was a sect of cultivators. When people from the same sect fought, their fighting styles were similar. At this time, the mist instantly enveloped the 3 of them. The people standing outside couldn't see what they were doing. Also, right now, no one was going to see what they were doing. Ling Ji crossed his arms in front of his chest and stood shoulder to shoulder with Yin Qinyan. The two didn't seem to plan on participating in the battle. His gaze landed on Meng Qi. His life bond sword whistled in the air and returned to his side. The tip of the sword trembled and pointed in the direction of Meng Qi like its owner. This child! The thick mist of Jingyue Sky could block the gazes of other Xiuzhe, but couldn't block Ling Ji's. And it's a pity. His voice wasn't loud. Other than Yin Qinyan, standing next to him, no one probably heard what he was saying. With his talent, Jingyue Sky's foundation, and his father's nurturing, his future will be limitless in the future. But it's good that the youth is hot-blooded. The redness in Ling Ji's eyes slowly faded. He had already recovered his previous sharpness. His gaze pierced through the thick fog and the moonlight and landed on Yin Xian's tall figure. With a hint of curiosity and admiration, he said, "This child's bravery and pride are somewhat similar to mine when I was young." When he heard that Yin Xinyan was already Meng Qi's Dao companion, he was already angry. Under the sound of the 1,000 Emperor's bell, Meng Qi didn't run towards them. Instead, he ran towards Shui Chengxian and the others. Ling Ji didn't know why, but he was secretly pleased. Behind Yin Xian, Qin Xiaoma was controlling his sword with his left hand. His right hand was hanging by his side. A few drops of blood slid down the back of his hand and dripped onto the ground along his fingertips. The color of the blood was somewhat strange. The blood was mixed with bits of dark gold light. Every drop of blood that dripped down was completely swallowed by the dark gold light before it landed on the ground. On the city wall, a few more people jumped down. Their eyes were also bright red. Their black eyeballs couldn't be seen anymore. These people wore black robes. Some of them had their natal swords floating in front of them. Some of them had their natal magic treasures opening the way in front of them. On the lapels of their black robes, there were different symbols embroidered. This meant that they weren't cultivators from the same sect. These people didn't seem to want to interfere in the battle of Jinghue's sky. They all wanted to go around the mist and rush towards Qin Xiaoma, who was blocked by the mist. However, just as they passed by the mist, the crescent moon above the mist suddenly flashed. The thick fog expanded and rushed towards them, wanting to envelop them as well. Oomph. The tallest person among them snorted coldly. The sword in front of his chest suddenly whistled as it rushed forward. The sword Qi soared into the sky, forcibly cutting a path through the fog. Unrelated people, please move aside, the tall young sword cultivator said coldly. His tone was somewhat polite. Yin Xian didn't answer him. What answered him was the mist. The mist that was cut open by the sword energy closed again in the blink of an eye. Then it once again enveloped those people. The crescent moon flashed 3 times in the sky. Its light became brighter than before. At this moment, Meng Qi had already landed beside Qin Xiaoma. The cultivator, who was also wearing a black robe, reached out and subconsciously wanted to pull her behind him. He pointed his left hand and his natal sword horizontally in front of the 2 people. Meng Qi didn't say anything. She lowered her head and pressed the pulse on his right wrist. Soon, she withdrew her hand. Her beautiful brows slightly furrowed. She reached out and touched the blood on the back of Qin Xiaoma's hand. She brought it to her nose and smelled it. A pungent smell of something rotten rushed into her nostrils, causing her to frown even more. Southern border. Meng Qi tilted her head slightly. She didn't look at Qin Xiaoma. She just muttered in a low voice. There seemed to be a fire burning in her mind. She couldn't keep her mind clear. Every time the distant bell rang, the fire would burn even more fiercely. Even though Meng Qi couldn't see her appearance clearly, she could feel that there seemed to be a fire burning in her own Ling Hai. The Ling energy rolled and surged. It was as if there was a formation under her Ling Hai. Everything became scorching hot. The unfamiliar voice in her mind became louder and clearer. Kill, 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 kill them. They wronged you first. Meng Qi's beautiful brows furrowed slightly. Her hand that was hanging by her side unconsciously bent. The smell of blood in the air became stronger. Occasionally, there would be cries of alarm from the cultivators. She tilted her head. Her eyes were bright red. At this time, a clear light flashed through her eyes. Meng Qi focused on the dark golden blood on the back of Qin Xiaoma's hand. She desperately tried to keep her mind clear. Countless thoughts flashed through her mind. This thing, she must have seen it before. It was dark gold in color and had a pungent smell. When it came into contact with someone, it would enter their blood and use their blood to nourish itself. She must have seen this thing before, otherwise she wouldn't have blurted out the words southern border. But where was it? It was on the book. Or could it be that when he went to the southern land, he saw it in the southern land? Was it poison? Or was it... Once again, the sound of the bell came from the distant Wei Mountain. This time, within the sound of the bell, there seemed to be a faint sigh. Even though the sigh was very short, it was very pleasant to the ears. It was like the sound of a mountain stream. It was like a young girl sitting by the water. She was sighing as the flowers bloomed and withered. It's really the 1,000 Emperor's bell. Ling Ji slowly exhaled. His tone was firm but calm. So the Thousand Emperors bell fell here. His gaze finally moved away from Meng Qi. He looked into the distance. There the majestic green mountains rose and fell. Mist filled the air. It was vast and majestic. This was the ancient Jade Mountain. No one knew what was hidden in the mountain. After leaving here, everything that happened in the mountain would be completely sealed. These cultivators also wouldn't remember what happened here. Thousand Emperors bell. Ling Ji repeated. I originally thought that this thing had been completely destroyed after it disappeared 10,000 years ago. Thousand Emperors bell. Yun Qingyan glanced at Meng Qi. He also looked into the distance, like Ling Ji. This is the proud work of an ancient blacksmith. It is said that he spent 30 years to collect the grievances and blood of thousands of strong cultivators from various sects in the three realms. He then refined them into this Thousand Emperors bell. Later on, he failed the Mahayana realm tribulation. He sacrificed his own flesh and blood. The grievances and grievances of failing the tribulation were completely integrated into the bell. He curled his lips. His gaze was slightly cold. When the bell rings, it will bring out the grievances and desires hidden in the depths of people's hearts. That's right. Ling Ji's tone was calm. He still looked like he was competing with Yun Qingyan. I heard that before the Thousand Emperors bell was completed, there was a Mahayana realm cultivator who activated the Thousand Emperors bell that had not been completely refined. When the bell rings, the cultivators of the three realms almost went crazy. There was a massacre everywhere. People were in a terrible situation. It became a purgatory. Later on, the power of the Thousand Emperors bell would only become more terrifying after the sacrifice of the first blacksmith's flesh and grievances. It's just that after the first blacksmith's death, the Thousand Emperors bell's whereabouts were unknown. No one has ever activated the bell again. I didn't expect it to be hidden here. The person who activated the bell must have prepared for a long time. It's a pity. Yun Qingyan said, his cultivation level is still too low. His gaze swept across the city walls. He said calmly, if his cultivation level was higher, even if he was only at the Void Realm. I'm afraid that not many people would be able to walk out of this little 10 Extremes mountain alive today. Ling Ji's gaze moved slightly. The little 10 Extremes mountain currently had all the outstanding disciples of the strongest sects in the three realms. If half of them died here, it would probably be another bloodbath. After leaving the little 10 Extremes mountain, no one would know what happened here. Half of the most outstanding young disciples had perished. Those who survived would definitely bear the weight of suspicion of others. Originally, there was already a gap between the sects, so there would definitely be a war between them again. The sects that already had grudges against each other would probably take the opportunity to settle old and new grudges. Even if the Jin sect was originally peaceful, there was a possibility that because one of their own disciples had died here, there would be another incident. When that time comes, what would happen to the three realms? Even Ling Ji couldn't help but shudder. He didn't ask about the affairs of the sects in the past, not because he didn't know anything, but because he was too lazy to care. However, now that he was willing to be involved, he could not care less. It's not an easy thing to activate the Thousand Emperors bell. Ling Ji said. The first blacksmith who created the Thousand Emperors bell had the surname Ji. He didn't wait for Yun Qingyan to speak and continued. Later on, because of some reasons, the Ji clan either died or escaped. It said that the last of the Ji clan's bloodline moved to the Devil Realm to avoid disaster. Xiao Qi, Yun Qingyan said. She once saved a Ji clan member called Ji Wujiong. Ling Ji was speechless. 3 times. Yun Qingyan added. Ling Ji was speechless. Maybe more than 3 times. Yun Qingyan continued. That guy even gave Xiao Qi a piece of the Ji clan's family head token. Ling Ji was stunned, and the corners of his lips twitched. He couldn't help but look at the green-clothed female cultivator again. Meng Qi was still standing in front of Qin Xiaomao, with her head slightly lowered, deep in thought. She was so focused that it was as if the sounds of fighting around her, the sounds of sword energy slicing through the air, and the light from the explosions of spells didn't affect her at all. Ling Ji could only see the side of Meng Qi's face at this moment. Her nose was tall, and her chin was small and delicate, and her expression was extremely serious. He suddenly felt a surge of warmth in his chest. He was proud, but more than that, he was worried. Meng Qi suddenly raised her right hand, and the silver medicine knife appeared in her palm. She held the handle of the knife horizontally, lowered her head, and drew 3 scars on the back of Qin Xiuma's hand. The black-robed young man's expression didn't change at all. His hand that was controlling the sword was still very steady, as if he didn't care what Meng Qi did. Meng Qi's voice was low and hoarse. "This is the silk of the southern lands, 10,000 zombie silkworm." As she spoke, she waved her hand again, and the 5-spirit cauldron flew to her side. The small cauldron swayed gently and continuously swallowed the spiritual medicine that Meng Qi threw in. Meng Qi then took out a silver needle from her storage bag. The needle was very thin, and the tip of the needle was slightly different from ordinary needles. It had a small arc like a fish hook. She raised the back of Qin Xiuma's hand and used the silver needle to gently hook the dark golden light in the wound on the back of his hand. Meng Qi raised her hand, and a dark golden ray of light flashed. It grew longer and longer, and she actually pulled out an extremely thin thread from the other party's wound. Qin Xiuma's expression finally changed. He groaned, and his originally handsome face became somewhat distorted. His hand that was controlling the sword also dropped down, and his arm trembled slightly a few times uncontrollably. Meng Qi didn't speak anymore. She raised her hand, and the medicinal liquid that had been boiled in the 5-spirit cauldron poured down and soaked her left hand. Meng Qi smoothly wrapped the dark golden silk around her left hand. The silk, which was still somewhat ferocious just now, became docile as soon as it came in contact with the medicinal liquid. It obediently wrapped around her hand again and again. When it came to the end, she no longer needed to pull the silk. It was like the last string of a kite, and directly rushed out of Qin Xiuma's wound and wrapped around Meng Qi's left hand. Not long after, Qin Xiuma's originally furrowed brows relaxed, and Meng Qi's left hand was also wrapped by the dark golden silk into a cocoon. She put away the silver needle, and then took out a small and exquisite jade box from her storage bag. The box was carved out of an entire piece of jasper. Her left hand shook lightly, and the silk wrapped around her hand was removed, and she put it into the jade box. Meng Qi put away the small jade box and took out a box of medicinal powder. She picked out some and applied it to the wound on the back of Qin Xiuma's hand. After removing the 10,000 stiff silkworm silk that was wreaking havoc in Qin Xiuma's body, the wound was a small problem. As soon as the medicinal powder was applied, the bleeding had already stopped, and there was no need to bandage the wound. Dang! Another bell rang. Qin Xiuma's sword-like brows that had just relaxed were once again furrowed. Meng Qi's expression was still calm. She turned her head and looked towards the city wall where the Earth Barracks was located. Over there, the sword lights and techniques were even more concentrated. The Xiozha of the Earth Barracks were not all targeting the Heaven Barracks. Some of them had already started fighting among themselves. At this time, the Thousand Emperor Bell was ringing, and these people's attacks were becoming more and more vicious. On the city wall, blood was spreading like a thin mist. Even the sky behind the mist was dyed with a faint layer of blood. The Earth Barracks also had medical xiao, but most of those medical xiao were like Shui Chengxian. They originally had life-bound talismans that could save people, but they also had weapons that could hurt people. However, among the crowd on the city wall, a figure wearing a blue robe was nimbly shuttling through the crowd of Xiozha. His figure was tall but slightly thin, and he looked very agile. Every time he arrived in front of Xiozha, he would stop in his tracks. Then, a faint medicinal energy would spread out from his body. His life-bound talisman was also a small cauldron. The small cauldron had 3 legs and 2 handles. It was a bit similar to Meng Qi's 5-spirit cauldron. However, there were no patterns on it, and it looked more simple. From time to time, its owner would throw in some ling medicine or ling flowers into the small cauldron. Very quickly, a gurgling medicinal liquid would form. The blue-robed Xiujia's movements were very practiced. Stopping bleeding, treating injuries, applying medicine, bandaging. These were things he had done thousands of times. Even if he closed his eyes, it would be hard for him to make a mistake. Under his miraculous hands, some of the injured Xiujia on the city wall were quickly treated. This person was Li Che. However, following the sound of the 1,000 Emperor bell, the number of injured people on the city wall increased. No matter how fast and practiced Li Che's movements were, it was very difficult for him to take care of everything. He had just picked up a sword Xiu whose right arm was injured and bandaged the wound. Not far behind him, 3 Earth Camp Xiujia were burned by a flame that came out of nowhere. Amidst the screams, Li Che hurriedly charged towards the 3 burned Xiujia. He quickly cut open the robe of the person who was the most seriously burned. There was already a large hole in the other's robe. Under the hole, the skin was charred black. The scariest thing was that around the charred skin, there were some orange and blue dots. Li Che frowned. Almost all medical Xiujia would carry a medicinal knife with them. He was not an exception. He held the medicinal knife horizontally and carefully cut open a bit of the burned skin of the Xiujia. Then he put the medicinal knife away and brought it to his nose to sniff. So smelly. In that instant, Li Che almost fainted from the stench of the medicinal knife. Then his expression changed slightly. In the blink of an eye, that person's burned skin had turned grayish-white and lost all of its luster. This was its cold poison. A clear voice suddenly sounded in Li Che's ears. He instinctively turned his head and saw a female medical Xiu dressed in green standing next to him. She was doing the exact same action as him, using her own medicinal knife to cut open a bit of the burned skin of the Xiujia. Meng Qi, Li Che exclaimed. Why did you come here? He instinctively looked behind Meng Qi. Behind them, sword lights and spells were still wreaking havoc. From time to time, he could see the green poisonous fog that medical Xiu often used to attack. The battle was not over yet. Li Che was already a little confused. At this moment, he was even more confused. Ever since he entered this 10 Extremes mountain battlefield and was sent to the Earth Camp, he was a little confused about the situation outside of this small city on the mountaintop. He had heard the rules clearly, but he was not sure what he should do. It was only when everyone started fighting and more people were injured that he seemed to have finally found what he should do. Li Che had already been busy on the city wall, saving people for a while. When he saw the sudden appearance of Meng Qi, he was startled. Then, he quickly regained his senses and nodded. It's cold poison. Even though it was burned by fire, it was hidden in the fire. The real harm was the cold poison. I have this, Meng Qi said as he took out a small bottle from his storage bag and handed it to Li Che. This blood has a very strong fire tribute. Li Che did not care about anything else. A drop of blood was sent into his natal cauldron. Then, he quickly threw in a few herbs. Bang! Li Che's natal cauldron seemed to explode like fireworks. A cluster of sparks erupted. The sparks dissipated. The elixir in the cauldron had already turned into a small blood-red pill. The pill spun around and obediently flew into Li Che's palm. He did not hesitate to open the mouth of the burned and poisoned cultivator and stuff the pill in. After a few breaths, the cultivator let out a low groan. He slowly opened his eyes and looked at Li Che and Meng Qi. Many thanks, he muttered. His voice was still a little hoarse, but the blood in his eyes had already faded. It's okay. Li Che helped him up and turned him to the back of the city wall. He let him sit against the wall. Rest here for a while. Okay. That person nodded lightly. Meng Qi. Li Che turned his head after he finished speaking. However, he found that Meng Qi was no longer by his side. The slender green figure started to move among the injured cultivators on the city wall, just like he had just done. Wait for me. Li Che paused and hurriedly chased after her. He was already a little lost. He did not know what he should do. Saving people was an instinctive action. Meng Qi's sudden appearance surprised him a little. However, it was like a light in the fog, allowing him to see the front clearly. Li Che hurriedly chased after her. He looked with her at the unconscious Earth Camp cultivator lying on the ground. Ling Hai. Meng Qi's slender fingers quickly swept across the unconscious Earth Camp cultivator. In the end, she exhaled. Ling Hai shook. He fainted. That cultivator's head and face were covered in blood. The front of his long robe was also soaked with blood. He looked very seriously injured. It turned out that he had just fainted from fright. Li Che nodded. He took out a small incense stick from his storage bag. He casually lit the small incense stick and placed it near the nose of the unconscious cultivator. A light and slightly cool scent came from the incense stick. Meng Qi blinked her eyes and asked, "This is dispelling Meng incense?" "Yes." Li Che nodded. "I added some juice from gentian grass. It's a little bitter, but the effect is better." As he spoke, he took out a few more sticks and handed them to Meng Qi. "I still have some here. I'll give them all to you." "Many thanks." Meng Qi smiled at him and put away the dispelling Meng incense stick. She couldn't see it herself. The blood in her eyes slowly faded away. Just like Li Che, her eyes became clear again. That guy. Although Gu Lingji and Yun Qingyan were far away from them, they saw everything that happened in front of their eyes. He was not affected by the sound of the 1,000 Emperor's bell from the beginning to the end. Ling Ji said softly, as if he was mumbling to himself. His sword had already flown into the air when Meng Qi leaped onto the city wall. At this moment, it was not far behind Meng Qi. The tip of the sword flashed, and a cold light appeared. If there were any strange movements, this sword, which could be said to be the fastest sword in the world, would instantly attack. The 1,000 Emperor's bell contains the resentment and unwillingness of 10,000 years ago. It will make people fall into the same unwillingness. Ling Ji continued, "But it is not invincible." He looked at Meng Qi and then looked at Li Che. Suddenly, he sighed softly. He seemed proud, satisfied, and also sighed. The path of cultivation is long and difficult. In the end, there will still be people who have a firm heart. In the 3,000 worlds, there will still be people who will come later. At this moment, the 1,000 Emperor's bell rang 3 times in a row. Dang, dang, dang. Ling Ji suddenly let out a long howl and stood up from the ground. "Let me take a look at this magical item from 10,000 years ago." Chapter 162. In the air, the sound of a sword whistling through the air. Meng Qi and Li Che both looked up at the sky. They only had time to see Ling Ji's sharp figure flying across the sky, heading deeper into the Green Mountain. Other than them, the other practitioners were still fighting as if they didn't care what was happening. The sound of the 1,000 Emperor's bell became more and more urgent. Dang, 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 dang. It was almost as if the sound was knocking on people's hearts. The bell kept ringing, but Meng Qi felt that she was much more awake than before. Even the fire that had been burning in her heart and in her spiritual sea seemed to have been extinguished. Meng Qi's heart moved, and she took out the few Jianmeng Xiang that Li Che gave her. Is it because of this? Several small green incense sticks the length of a finger were held in her hand, emitting a slightly cold, bitter smell. Meng Qi. Li Che happened to be bandaging the wound on a female practitioner's arm. He turned around and saw Meng Qi, who was staring at the Jianmeng Xiang in a daze. He asked curiously, "What's wrong?" "Li Che." Meng Qi looked up at him. She just noticed that Li Che's eyes were cold, without a trace of blood. "Did you feel that there was a fire burning in your chest and spiritual sea? It makes people lose their consciousness." "No." Li Che shook his head blankly and reached out to touch his chest. He was a medical practitioner after all, so he quickly understood Meng Qi's meaning. "You mean?" Li Che stood up and glanced around. Above and below the city wall, the battle was getting more and more intense. Within a few breaths, some practitioners would be injured and fall down. The smell of blood in the air was getting thicker and thicker, and the practitioners' attacks were getting more and more vicious. Some of the sword moves and spells that they would only use on their enemies in the past were even attacking their companions who were still talking and laughing with each other a few days ago. Li Che was slightly startled. He touched his own chest and muttered to himself, "There's no fire burning. I only heard the sound of a bell, but that's..." He scratched his head in confusion. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a Xiuzha on the city wall fall backwards. Li Che didn't have time to think too much. His figure flashed and went forward to support the practitioner. He carefully helped him to sit down. Oh! That young sword cultivator let out a soft groan, his left hand pressing down on his right hand. "How are you?" Li Che asked as he held the injured male cultivator's left hand and moved it away from the wound on his right hand. As he spoke, he looked up at that person. The handsome young swordsman lowered his eyelids, his eyelashes covering most of the light in his eyes. But that couldn't hide the surging blood in his eyes. Li Che was slightly startled. He instinctively reached out and pinched that person's chin, turning him to face himself. He swallowed his saliva with some difficulty, then looked at Meng Qi. "They are his eyes." Li Che immediately reacted. "They were all affected by the sound of the bell?" "Yes." Meng Qi lit up the dream, dispelling incense, and put it to that person's nose. A slightly bitter and cold smell filled the air, but that person's eyes were still blood-red. "Is it not because of the dream dispelling incense?" Meng Qi put out the dream dispelling incense and mumbled as he put it away. Li Che had already started to clean the wound on that person's right arm. He said, "The dream dispelling incense can only stabilize the spiritual sea. Of course, it's not because of the dream dispelling incense." He paused and said, "The dream dispelling incense is a very common medicine. Even if it is added with gentian grass, it's not that powerful. It can be bought in any medicine shop in the south. If it's that powerful, they wouldn't be in this state right now." "Yes." Meng Qi nodded. When Ling Ji leaped up just now, she heard him clearly. He said that he wanted to meet the number 1 magical weapon from 10,000 years ago. Was he referring to the sound of the bell? "Meng Qi." Li Che suddenly raised his voice and raised that person's arm. "Come and take a look." The blood that flowed out of the wound on the man's right arm also had a dark golden glow. 10,000 zombie silkworm. Li Che leaned closer and sniffed, then suddenly blurted out. He was born in the south, so it was impossible for him to not recognize this poisonous insect that only existed in the south. "It's the 10,000 zombie silkworm again." Meng Qi's eyes flashed. She found the silk of this 10,000 zombie silkworm in Qin Xiuma's wound just now. She frowned slightly. Was this person injured by the same person as Qin Xiuma? It should be said that it's the silk of the 10,000 zombie silkworm, Li Che said as he began to throw spiritual herbs and spiritual flowers into his life-bound medicinal cauldron. The silk of the 10,000 zombie silkworm is the best material for making hand gloves. If you add a little bit of it to a pair of hand gloves, it will be impervious to fire and water, cold and heat. We medical cultivators like it very much. You must have heard of it before. As he spoke, he sighed lightly. Later on, for some reason, someone started to use it to hurt people. After this thing is refined, it can drill into a wound and quickly travel through the entire body. After 12 hours, it can take root in a cultivator's spiritual sea and use the cultivator's ling energy and blood to nourish itself. As long as the cultivator's ling energy and blood don't have enough, the silk won't be destroyed. At that time, even a more powerful medical cultivator won't be able to save the cultivator. They can only wait for this thing to exhaust the cultivator's ling energy and the spiritual sea to dry up. Unless, Li Che said, unless the spiritual sea can be reconstructed, the cultivator will still be alive, but he will forever be a cripple. He thought that Meng Qi didn't know, so he explained in detail. Meng Qi nodded her head. But if it can be discovered within 12 hours, the silk of the 10,000 zombie silkworm is very easy to cure. The 10,000 zombie silkworm's favorite ingredient is the 9 mulberry tree's leaves, the scarlet flower fruit, and the crescent blade vine. Once it is applied to the hand, it can be easily extracted from the wound, Li Che said without holding back. Meng Qi looked at Li Che. She naturally knew the method. Just now, she had used the same method to extract the 10,000 zombie silkworm's silk from Qin Xiuma's body. Li Che's gaze was serious and focused. As he spoke, the 3 spiritual herbs in his life-bound medicinal cauldron had already been boiled into a green medicinal liquid. Just as he was about to apply it to his hand, Meng Qi raised her hand and blocked in front of his hand, Let me do it. She didn't wait for Li Che to speak before she grabbed the other's hand and flipped it over. She pointed at a small wound on the back of his hand and said faintly, "The prerequisite is that there is no wound on that person's hand." As Meng Qi spoke, she released Li Che's hand. The medicinal concoction poured down and smeared across her left hand. She then took out the silver needle that looked like a fish hook and hooked a strand of silk that was thinner than a strand of hair from the Xiujia's wound. She wrapped it around her own hand that had been smeared with the medicinal liquid. Li Che's eyes lit up. "Your silver needle is very useful." Meng Qi said, "I made it myself." Yin Xinyan had taught her how to make a medicinal knife before. She also knew how to make formations, so she only knew a little about making simple tools. Although he couldn't be like those weapon refiners, who could craft all kinds of powerful weapons, it was still very easy to make a handy tool. "It looks like a fish hook." Li Che stared at it for a moment and concluded. Meng Qi nodded. "I got my inspiration from the fish hook. When we leave here, I will also customize one." Li Che's voice had just faded when he scratched his head in embarrassment. "If I still remember your words at that time." Meng Qi took out a similar silver needle from her storage bag and handed it over. "You gave me the Meng Xie incense, and I will give you the silver needle." "Thank you." Li Che didn't stand on ceremony with her, and immediately took it. He looked at it carefully. "There seems to be a pattern carved on it. I've carved a small talisman formation on it." Meng Qi explained. By using a spirit stone to activate the formation, some medicinal properties can be attached to the silver needle and it won't dissipate for a quarter of an hour. This way, we can use this quarter of an hour to bring the medicinal energy to the meridians or other places that we need. Li Che was stunned when he heard this. After a moment, he couldn't help but blink his eyes. Although he didn't know much about refining tools and didn't know much about formations, he still knew that carving a formation on such a thin silver needle wasn't an easy task. Even the silver needles that medical cultivators like them could buy on a daily basis would not be used in such a manner. Unless they were like Shui Changxian, who chose to use silver needles as their natal magic treasure. Their natal magic treasure was indeed much more powerful than these ordinary ones. "Many, many thanks." Li Che was silent for a moment, but still put away the silver needle. In this short period of time, Meng Qi had already extracted all of the 10,000 stiff silkworm silk from the sword practitioner's body. Her left hand was wrapped in a dark golden cocoon. Meng Qi took out the small jasper box and put the cocoon inside. Just as Li Che said, the silk of the 10,000 stiff silkworm was a rare and precious item. It wasn't often seen. "Meng Qi, over here." When she finished, Li Che had already helped another practitioner up and let her lean against the wall. Her spiritual energy was exhausted, and someone took advantage of her weakness to injure her meridians. Her spiritual energy was also affected. Li Che quickly said, "There are also external injuries on her back from her left shoulder to her waist." Li Che paused for a moment, then quickly said, 10,000 stiff silkworm." He turned to look at Meng Qi and repeated in disbelief, "It's the 10,000 stiff silkworm again." Meng Qi waved her hand, and the 5-spirit cauldron spun around her. She casually threw in the leaves of the 9 mulberry tree, the red flower fruit, and the moonblade vine. Bhikkhu Pavilion, although she didn't have the 5-spirit cauldron as long as Li Che, the speed at which she refined medicine with this small cauldron was much faster than him. In the time it took to breathe, the 3 medicinal herbs turned into a green medicinal liquid. A medicinal aroma that resembled bamboo juice overflowed from the small cauldron. Meng Qi helped the female practitioner lie down. She stretched out her hand and carefully opened the blood-soaked clothes on her back. On the female practitioner's fair and jade-like back, there was a hideous wound that ran from her left shoulder to her right waist. The wound was very narrow. It should have been caused by a sharp sword. If that sword had been a bit more vicious, the female practitioner in front of her would have been chopped into 2 halves. Meng Qi took out a small blue medicine bottle from her storage brocade pouch and poured the medicine powder on the bleeding wound on the female practitioner's back. As soon as the medicine powder touched the wound, The unconscious female practitioner's body suddenly tensed up. She let out a muffled groan and slowly opened her eyes. "Don't move," Meng Qi instructed in a low voice. "Ugh," the female practitioner responded softly. Her watery eyes were still filled with blood. Even though she was lying on the ground, the wound on her back was extremely painful. Her spiritual aura was also exhausted. Even her spiritual sea was starting to crack. However, she still raised her hand with all her might. A blood-red rose condensed in her palm. However, after 2 petals spread out, the rose disappeared again. "Ugh!" The female practitioner let out another muffled groan. Her body went limp, and she once again lay on the ground. Meng Qi's expression was indifferent. Her slender fingers quickly pulled out a dark golden silk from the female practitioner's wound. Her left hand had already been soaked in the medicinal liquid. The silk from the 10,000 stiff silkworm seemed to have a life of its own. It quickly wrapped around her hand and fingers. In just a short moment, Meng Qi's left hand was once again wrapped in the dark golden silk. There are already small cracks in her spiritual sea. Li Che was also busy. The medicinal liquid in his life-bound cauldron was churning nonstop. It would be best if it condensed into a small ball of medicinal liquid. Li Che waved his hand. The medicinal liquid accurately flew into the porcelain cup he took out. Meng Qi. He raised his hand and then put it down. Then, he looked up at Meng Qi. "Please help her sit up." Meng Qi had already finished treating the wound on the female practitioner's back. She carefully helped her up. Li Che poured the medicinal liquid in the porcelain cup into the female practitioner's mouth. He said, "If she doesn't use any more spiritual aura, her spiritual sea will be fine for the time being. However, the cracks in her spiritual sea are a bit strange. I carefully examined them. They don't seem to be caused by the exhaustion of spiritual aura." "Okay." Meng Qi nodded. The female practitioner's spiritual sea only had some very small cracks. If they were caused by the exhaustion of spiritual aura, with her spirit severing stage cultivation, she would be able to repair them on her own in 10 to 15 days. "The wound on her back, although it appears to be very narrow and not deep," said Chu Feng. Meng Qi said, "But the sword cultivator who injured her may not have a higher cultivation level than her, but his sword aura is extremely strong. It penetrated her bones and injured her spiritual sea." She paused and said, "Her spiritual sea was injured by the sword aura? This sword aura is sharp and swift. Such a sharp sword intent is a bit like..." Xiao Ran jumped and landed on the city wall. He looked at Meng Qi and Li Che, who were gathered together to study the female practitioner's wound. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but he still said, "Masterman, fellow Taoist Meng." He looked at Meng Qi and Li Che, who were squatting on the ground and looking up at him at the same time. When he met their clear and serious eyes, he didn't know why, but he couldn't bring himself to say the next sentence. "This female practitioner was injured by me." Xiao Ran didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.